Hello, this is Bad Vibes. Welcome to my Christmas mega collab. Joining me today are tons of channels. A majority of them are rather small, so make sure you sub to as many as possible. Timestamps will be in the description and in the pinned comment, so feel free to skip through and find the voices that you like the most. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Also, have a Merry Christmas, or whatever you celebrate. This is a very true story. I'm a 16-year-old girl, and in my hometown there's a lot of houses from the 1800s, but mainly they are new houses. I just happened to get a babysitting gig with another girl because their kids were very hard to take care of. Now, I wasn't very familiar with babysitting, seeing that I've only taken care of my cousins from time to time. Anyways, I went to the house after picking up the girl who was helping me with the kids. Let's just say this house looked like a murder house from the 1800s. But I shook off the feeling and went in to meet the parents. Also, the girl and I were working from 4 to 11 p.m. and Halloween was next week, so this makes it even more crazy. The kids and I got along great. I kept their names straight, unlike the other girl. She did nothing but play on her phone. She didn't help with the kids. Things were fine until about 9:30 p.m. I put down one of the kids and the girl put down the other one. We had one kid left, and he was old enough to get into his bed on his own. Once all of them were in bed, some shit happened, and we still can't explain how these things happened. The first thing that happened was on the intercom that was in the parents' office and basement. Static and moans came out from it, and in the basement we heard footsteps running up and down and moving of plastic bags. I heard a grown man's laugh where the kids were, and bolted the stairs as fast as I could as my motherly instinct to protect them. When I got up there, they were fine, and they had a guard dog to protect them, but you never know what could happen. Things just got weirder. Those things kept happening, and the girl I was with hid in the bathroom and was no help. So I grabbed the other dog, since I wasn't downstairs a lot due to my runs to make sure the kids were okay. Big mistake, that dog was evil. It bit me and the girl. The kids as well, which is why she was left outside in the first place. But I had to do something to protect this girl, even if I disliked her. I still didn't want her to die. The parents came home at 11, and we told them everything. And well, the dad went into the basement and saw the intercom was turned on, and the girl's food bag, which I saw her throw away, was down there, which was freaking creepy as hell. I wasn't too scared because somehow I've always been kind of fearless, but I'm still trying to figure out how those things happened. I'm looking in to see if there was someone murdered in that house. We have a lot of haunted places where I live, and I decided to post my story of paranormal activities, which I don't believe, but it was just too weird to be a human.
This is not my own story, but my father's. He swears that this story is true. This event takes place in the year 1985, but to give this story depth, we must go back further. There are legends that tell of a beautiful woman by the name Maria, who was once very happy, living with her husband and their children in Mexico. But soon, that happiness turns to anger, regret, and grief. Her husband leaves her for a younger woman. Maria loses herself in the madness and takes her children to the river to drown them for revenge against her husband's unfaithfulness. After killing her children, she soon realizes what she has done. She takes her own life in the very same river where her children lost theirs. Maria is now cursed, unable to find peace in the afterlife. She is trapped between the living world and the spirit world, forever wandering the earth in search of her children. She still cries for her children till this day. As it goes, if any child is out too late, she will take them, mistaking them for her own. With her constant weeping, she was given the name La Leona. It is said if you hear her wails, you might be marked for death. parents use a story to keep children in at night. But stories are just stories, right? So one night, a friend and I decided to go cruising around Central on a Friday. It was a common thing to do when you had nothing going on. We were using my grandfather's car at the time. It was starting to get late, so we decided to head back. For one reason or another, I decided to use a different route that led to a bridge that crossed the Rio Grande River. I was driving when something caught my attention. A dark figure appeared on the driver's side. What I thought to be a trash bag. It touched the windshield. As soon as it did, the car stalled. It dragged itself to the passenger side. I was going at least 30 miles per hour when it crossed our path. It did not make a thump noise, like it had a physical form, but a whooshing noise, as if it was floating over the car. I said to my friend in an uneasy tone, "What the hell was that?" He looked at me. It showed in his face that something was truly wrong. He had a better look at the figure as it left on the passenger side. He said, "I think you hit an old woman." We coasted off the road. The car refused to start. As soon as that old woman touched it, there were no cars for miles. We got out. I popped open the hood. As I was checking the engine, my friend ran back to where we saw her, expecting to find an old woman on the ground, covered in blood. He came back and said there was nothing. We thought we killed someone, but there was no woman to be found. Not a trace. I closed the hood. We got back into the car, and we got out of there as fast as we could. We made it back to the house. We got out of the car. We saw 4 bloody streaks going across the windshield, like that of a hand being dragged across. But the car had no dents, no cracks on the windshield, like you think it would if you hit someone. Just the blood. My friend washed off the car as soon as he saw the blood. We checked the news for the next few days to make sure there were no bodies discovered on that bridge. No one claimed to be hit by a car. Nothing. That gave me terrifying thoughts. But it's the only thing that makes sense. We were on a bridge over the Rio Grande River. The river flows through Mexico, where the legend of La Leona lives.
This story is not about a ghost or an encounter with a creepy stranger. It's not even about a near-death experience or something like that. As a matter of fact, I was never even in danger during the event I'm about to tell you. Nonetheless, it's a disturbing memory that I will carry with me until the day I die. I grew up in a small city, the kind of place you could barely call a town if it wasn't for the sheer number of people living there. Downtown was only a couple blocks long, and in the middle of it was one of the biggest buildings in the area. It was a local movie theater named after the city. I remember going there when I was young, about 7 years old, and watching the first Pokemon movie. And it was probably nothing compared to the theaters we have nowadays, but back then, it was huge for me. I loved it. So when a few years later I heard the cinema was going out of business, I felt really sad about it. The building was sold to a religious group that used it for their services. You know the type. Loud music, big crowds with their arms in the air singing praises, and having some kind of seizure on stage while the pastor yells through a mic. And every time I walked past the old cinema, I'd see the announcements of the congregation where movie posters would have been. And if they were in session, you could hear them all singing from the other side of the street. This group owned the cinema for nearly a decade, until the local government bought it back in order to restore it as a historic landmark of the city. When this happened, I was studying construction with the intent to follow architecture or civil engineering at college. And my class was very lucky to be involved with the cinema's restoration project because 2 of our teachers were architects working on it. I will always remember the day we went to visit the old cinema. Our class was small, only a handful of students, but we were all around the same age, so we all shared childhood memories of when the cinema was operational. I ran through the corridors of the auditorium, sat in the chairs just like we did when we were little kids, and began stomping our feet on the wooden floor, filling the entire room with the echoes of our drumming and laughters. A little ritual of sorts. Everyone used to do it right before the beginning of the movie. Once nostalgia time was over, we went back to the purpose of the trip, and began to survey the building. We were very excited because this was a unique opportunity to go into places we had never been allowed to otherwise. So we made sure to check out every last corner, every single room, no matter how far, no matter how obscure. The first one we found was below the stage. On one of the corners there was a little door, not very visible, probably because it was meant for maintenance staff only. Behind it we found a long room filled with rusty boilers, part of the old heating system that was no longer in use. The place was a little creepy, with all those old tanks and pipes crowding the narrow space. But what we found just past them was what really started to freak us out. This room was small, very small. It was, after all, basically just leftover space behind the boilers, yet it contrasted so much with the rest of the area around it, it may as well have been a different place altogether. The walls were painted a light color, white I think, but I don't remember it very well because what really got my attention were the drawings in them. There were rainbows, a smiling sun, trees and flowers, and happy little people with smiles on their faces and dotted eyes. It was a daycare. The whole class and the teacher gathered to see the discovery. We were all very confused about the strange placing of this room. Okay, we could understand the need for a place to keep the kids who were just a little too little to be amongst the crowd during prayers, or maybe the ones of people who worked there. But the placing was just odd. The stage was probably one of the loudest places in the auditorium during the services, and this was right below it, so there's no way it could have been a quiet place for children. We left the boiler room and continued on the tour to the little theater, a bit puzzled by our finding, but not giving it too much thought. Outside the auditorium there were bathrooms, both in terrible condition. The ticket sale booth and a huge set of stairs that led to a mezzanine in the auditorium. Half the seats there were totally ruined due to a water leak in the roof, and I cursed those people for not taking proper care of the building. With that part done, all that was left was the projection room on the 3rd floor. Behind the ticket booth, there was a door that led to a spiral staircase. I don't remember how tall it actually was, but it must have been over 10 meters of metallic steps, without a single resting stop. I wasn't exactly an athlete, but I could walk several kilometers with no problem. I rode a bike to and from school every single day. Yet, by the time I reached the top of the stairs, I was exhausted. And I wasn't the only one. All my classmates complained about how hard it was to walk up here. After a short break to catch our breath, we moved on to explore the 3rd floor. It was roughly a narrow passageway with a couple of divisions to form different rooms. But it was more than enough for what it was made for. The first room from the stairs was a storage deposit, probably where they kept the movies and other equipment, and except for some trash, it was mostly empty. The second room was the one we're all excited to see, the projector room. The old machine was so big that it was still there. Even with some pieces scattered around, it was quite a piece of history, and we were all very thrilled to check it out. So no one really bothered to move on to the very last room until we were all about to leave. And there we saw it again. There was a train in this one instead of a rainbow. Something was written on it, in big, colorful letters. Something about Christ. I can't remember it well. The drawings were a bit old, the paint slightly peeled from the walls, but the colors were just as cheerful as you'd expect them to be for a place where children play. My heart sank to my stomach as I came to the realization of what the place really was. The one behind the boilers, probably serving the same purpose. I took notice of how isolated the room was, literally the furthest away you could have possibly gotten from everything else. I thought about the 3 floors of stairs and imagined what it would be like to be a child and have to walk all the way up, only to end up in that room, the room with the colorful train on the wall. My classmates and I exchanged horrified expressions, as I knew we were all thinking the same thing. We never visited the theater again. Even though we continued with the restoration project for several months, we never talked about those 2 rooms. Cases of molestation in the church are well known by everyone, to the point that the pedo priest is practically a cliche. But this is the kind of thing you think happens in some faraway place, in another city, even in another country. You can never imagine it in the very same town where you live, the place where you grew up, in the very same building where you once watched a Pokemon movie when you were 7 years old.
The following is a true horror story about a school bus kidnapping. On July 15, 1976, 3 men kidnapped 26 school kids from a school bus in California. The children in the bus were ages 5 to 14. They held shotguns to the kids, dressed like bank robbers with pantyhose over their faces. They poked the kids in the belly, telling them to shut up. One said, "Tell me your name or you're never gonna see your mommy and daddy again." They drove the kids around for 2 hours in 2 vans, then forced everyone to climb into a hole in the ground, into a box truck which was buried underground in a rock quarry. They then sealed the hole, leaving the kids and the bus driver buried alive. It felt to the kids in there like a grave. While they left cereal, peanut butter, and bread, it ran out quickly, and there was no ventilation. During this terrifying experience, the driver emerged as the hero, comforting the kids. They were in there for 16 hours before they escaped by digging through 3 feet of dirt. The kidnappers were caught and sentenced to life in prison. This is what one of the kidnappers said was the reason he picked to kidnap children.
"We picked children because they are precious. The state would be willing to pay for them, and they don't fight back. They're vulnerable. They will do what we tell them to."
The kidnapper also said what made them put everyone inside the box truck underground.
"The first place I picked was a barn. Mr. Woods, one of the kidnappers, had 7 acres in Fremont that had a barn on it, but the barn was old and full of holes. You'd need 4 people on each side to keep everybody from escaping. So I thought, how about a moving van? And I just wanted something that everyone would fit into and they couldn't get out of. We thought that in a moving van they could just cut through the sheet metal walls and get out. Then the idea came to bury the van. If it was underground, they couldn't just cut through the walls and get out."
So these bad guys are all in prison now, right? No. Life in prison doesn't mean life in prison in America. You would think they'd be locked away forever. But you get the chance for parole, which allows you to go free and be let out of prison. In this case, which was in Chowchilla, California, the former sheriff, prosecutor, and judge in the case said the kidnapper's sentence was too much, and on June 20th, 2012, the first of the kidnappers, Richard Schoenfield, was set free. What happened to the kids? They grew into adults, and a lot were depressed. Some felt that bad things would happen to them. The trauma of the kidnappings caused them a lot of problems. Some couldn't stop dreaming about killing the kidnappers. Others couldn't sleep, even with the nightlight on. or ride in a subway, or go underground. Whenever anyone commits a crime, there are consequences for the victims. You might think a simple burglary is harmless, but it isn't. It terrifies those who are victims to it. We can only imagine what these kids went through. What was the reason for the kidnappings? It was all for money. The kidnappers had planned to demand $5 million for their release. When the school bus went missing, so many distraught and worried families started calling the police that the phone lines got so busy that the kidnappers hadn't actually been able to call in their ransom demand. By 2015, the second of the kidnappers was set free. The third kidnapper is eligible for parole this year. So, all three will be out. If you ever think you're safe from bad guys, don't. They can go anywhere, be anywhere. All it takes is getting into a car and they could come near you. It's always good to watch out and keep vigilant, but sometimes there's just nothing you can do.
It was approximately 2 weeks ago, just before Halloween. Now let me start by saying I'm not an avid outdoorsman. I love hiking, and I've spent countless hours in my city's 16 square mile state park, nature reserve, whatever you want to call it. But I'm not a mountain man by any means. The park is home to several indigenous mammals, birds, fish, and reptiles, and is full of small ponds, thick brush, and even swampy marshes in spots. There are designated hiking and biking trails that sprawl the area, but there's also several wild areas that aren't very maintained or used. Being that I have an adventurous streak, and that I also hate being around groups of people, I often find myself in these less ventured or wild areas. Now, it's worth noting that I've never really felt uncomfortable in this park. It's kind of like my safe place. I go there to get away, decompress after work, or just be alone sometimes. It feels like a second home, in ways. Anyway, enough background information. I'm rambling. I had just pulled up to one of the less commonly fished ponds, Beaver Lake, and I intended to circle the far side, 3/4 mile away from my truck, on one of the hiking trails that goes right next to the tree line, and then into the tree line, and then push further back onto one of the old horse trails. Now, this horse trail in particular doesn't get used much anymore. I can't say why, for sure, but I've heard a myriad of different reasons from different people. Most logical explanation is that it just isn't as convenient to get to anymore, and it gets pretty marshy when it rains. I'd be able to follow the normal hiking trail for the first 3/4 mile, but I'd have to fork left off onto the trail once I went into the tree line. The gate to the Old Horse Trail was about 500 yards to my 9 o'clock from there, just through an overgrown thicket and up a slight hill. I made my way over the 4-foot gate and started exploring. I had about an hour and a half before sunset, and I have a strict, fuck the woods at night, policy, so I was watching the time. My main goal for this adventure was to snap some pictures of the area for a project I'd been working on, and I'll admit, I was more distracted than I typically am. Anyway, close to an hour passed. I had gotten some good shots, and I figured now was the time for my egress. It'd take me close to 30 minutes to get back to my truck, and I wasn't keen on getting stuck in an unfamiliar area at night. I sat my backpack down on a stump, dropped to one knee, and started packing and organizing my stuff. I'm not sure what the catalyst was, but I suddenly felt this terrible sense of dread. I slowly turned and scanned my surroundings. Nothing seemed out of place. I stood up and grabbed my bag. When I took a step forward, a leaf crunched under my boot, and I realized that everything was dead silent. Now, as I said above, I'm not an avid outdoorsman by any means, but I know well enough that silence like this is an indication that a predator is nearby. You need to quickly and calmly make your way out of the area and stay vigilant. It's worth noting that while mountain lions and black bears are not technically indigenous to my area, there have been more than enough caught and relocated for it to be a valid concern. I've been stalked by a mountain lion on one other occasion, and this felt eerily similar, so that was at the forefront of my mind. I'd been moving for probably 5 minutes, and everything honestly seemed fine. I had lulled myself into believing that I was overreacting, and that everything was fine. I didn't see anything. I didn't hear anything. Good, right? Wrong. By this point, the trail was completely overgrown on both sides. I could see fairly clearly behind me, and a decent way ahead, but my left and right may as well have been fall-colored walls. I must have gotten lost in the thought for a moment, because I tripped on a root and ate shit. As I was picking myself up, I started hearing a soft, cooing or chittering off to my right. It sounded like a mix of a dove and the predator. It would start with a coo or yelp and end with this weird chittering sound. I'm actually sitting here trying to replicate it, and I sound ridiculous. I'm not sure my throat is even capable of recreating it. I'm out of shape, and there is no way I'm outrunning anything, so I scrambled up, planted my feet, and tried to make myself look as menacing as a fat 22-year-old with a backpack and glasses can look. About 100 yards ahead of me, which would have been originally behind me had I not fallen. So toward where I had taken the pictures and was moving away from, I saw the underbrush start to shake, and it sounded like something was tearing through it. I only had about 20 minutes of daylight at this point, and it would take me at least that long to get back to my truck. So I did exactly what you're not supposed to do. Naturally, I turned around, and I fucking booked it, knowing good and damned well that I can run for maybe half a mile, 3/4 of a mile if something's trying to kill me, maybe. I could barely hear anything over my own footfalls and the sound of my heart pounding. But whatever it was chasing me through the underbrush, and it was gaining on me. It may have been 15 yards behind me at this point, and I still had a ways to go. I don't know if fear kept me going or what, but I reached deeper and just kept running. My breathing got shallow, my vision started blurring, and I was honestly about to collapse when I saw the gate to the horse trail about 300 yards ahead of me. This thing is right on top of me now, and as soon as I came within arm's reach of the gate, I planted my foot on the bottom rung and launched myself over it. My landing was not graceful. I landed on my right shoulder and tumbled several yards down the hill and into a puddle of muck. I wasn't thinking straight now, and I stood up, shakily, and started making my way towards the tree line and pond. I knew what direction to go, and I didn't even bother finding the hiking trail. I just crashed through the brush and overgrowth like some kind of barbarian. I didn't care about the cuts and scrapes, or the massive amounts of noise I was making. My only thought was to get out. The chittering noises had stopped, but I still heard something moving in the brush at the top of the hill. It wasn't trying to be quiet anymore either. I finally broke through the tree line and could see my truck parked across the pond at the top of the hill. I took a deep breath and started slowly walking away from the tree line. The ominous feeling lifted, and I started making my way up the trail alongside the tree line. I was able to catch my breath for about 15 seconds until I heard that god-awful cooing and chittering behind me again. I turned to look back at the tree line behind me. So at this point, there's a trail leading into the tree line in front of me, tree line to my right, water to my left, and trail leading alongside the tree line and around the pond to the cars behind me. The underbrush at the tree line ahead of me started to shake, and fear took over. I'm thankful that my bag is waterproof and that my phone is water resistant because I jumped in the pond and I swam across. I've never really told this story to anyone in my personal life. They'd probably think I'm crazy, and I doubt they'd ever consider me credible, especially given my interest in Bigfoot and other cryptids. I don't know what was stalking me that day. I know I wound up cold, wet, and a bit shaken up, I also know I've not been able to go back to that part of the park, and I can't come up with a good explanation. Beaver Lake is off limits to me for a while.
Hi, my name is John. I'm self-employed graphic designer, and something pretty weird's been happening to me lately. I feel I need to keep track of it, and so I'm going to write everything down as it happens, so please be patient if this is tough to read. I'm keeping this as a log, but I'll only upload if it's worth anything. April 2nd. I've been twitching a ton lately, just small movements like a finger pressing the wrong key on my keyboard or slashing lines through my drawing pad. Stuff like that. Nothing huge, but it's getting noticeably worse. April 5th. The twitching is still there, and now it's turned into whole tremors that sometimes send jolts that run up my arms, and, well, I'm probably going to go see a doctor soon. April 7th. Doctor says I may be hypoglycemic and to come back later for more testing. April 11th. The tremors are gone and everything seems alright. Updated my doctor and he says just be careful and keep an eye out while driving and operating machinery. April 15th. The tremors are back. Kind of not, but like, it's almost like I lost control of my left hand for a short period of time. It just nudged itself. Just to be safe, I'm going back to the doctor's ASAP. April 16th. Doctor definitely seems puzzled when I explain the situation to him. He told me to go see a psychologist because this is unlike anything he's seen before, but he's read a few studies on something called alien hand syndrome. And that seems to be pretty on the nose, but he wants me to speak to an expert. April 17th. My hand is definitely moving on its own. I did some reading on what the doctor said, and it seems like this could be it. After reading up on it and finding a few studies, I found that people who have this syndrome or disorder or whichever you want to call it, their hands actually have independent personalities. Not really sure how to put it, but when asked questions, they write out their own answers. So I'm going to try my own little test. A thing happened while I was setting up for the test and doing my nightly routine. First, I should explain what I'm doing. I plan to put a notebook and a pencil on my nightstand and hope that my hand will try to communicate with me. Man, what is happening in my life? I'm trying to talk to my hand. But anyways, I was making dinner. It was just a burger, and when I was getting ready to slice some onion to put on my burger, my hand just slid itself off the counter. I guess it doesn't like onions. Not sure how because it doesn't taste, but I guess I can live without onion. It also really didn't want to let go of the pen when I tried to put it down. Anyways, I'm going to bed and hoping there will be something on the notebook. April 18th. Well, the test worked. I woke up to a scrawled out hello onto a nearly torn in half sheet of paper on my bed. Not exactly what I was expecting, but it does seem kind of underwhelming. But anyways, I'm scheduling an appointment with that psychologist today. Hopefully she can help me out. I've got the appointment set up for early tomorrow. Thankfully, because this is starting to creep me out, my left hand is starting to move more to the point that I'm struggling to type out this log without Lefty. Yeah, I figured I'd give it a nickname. Playing with something on my desk or doing something else. It's like having another person with me all the time. April 19th. Nothing on the notebook tonight. Maybe it wanted me to respond? I think I'll just write down a few basic questions to it. I mean, I wouldn't be able to hold a one-sided conversation either, so I guess I can't expect my sentient hand to. I think I'll see what Dr. Lang, my psychologist, thinks what questions I should ask it, or if I should at all. Dr. Lang was very friendly, but I'll be referring to her as Doc for ease of typing on my part, which has become obviously more difficult lately. She expressed a surprising amount of interest in my case. Well, I guess surprising to me. But the real weird thing for me is that she expressed worry for both me and my hand. I guess it makes sense if my hand has its own consciousness. I asked her about the questions, and she told me that the hands that are included in cases like mine can usually hear and understand what are happening around them, but, well, they're just around for the ride. at which point my hand just made an up and down motion. I'm assuming a nod of agreement. She told me just ask some questions like I'm getting to know someone, which isn't too far off, I guess. April 20th. I asked the hand a few questions, like I met someone new, with a few personal curiosities, but set up a laptop on the nightstand after it tore through a few sheets of paper after writing hi. Here are the questions and coordinating answers. Be warned, they are kind of creepy. What's your name? Lefty, I guess. Although I've always liked the name Bruce. Do you have favorite things like color, movie, or food? Yes, I do. I'm also a person, believe it or not. Don't like onions? No. I can taste everything you can. Hate that shit. Have you always been around? And if so, why show up now? I've always been here, just haven't been strong enough to do anything. You want to keep seeing the doc? Or can we work this out? Keep seeing her. I like her. How can you tell what's going on? Not sure you'd understand, but it's like I have my own little room. I see none of the questions, but to think I've had this whole other personality in my head for, well, my whole life is such a bizarre feeling. They know everything about me, but I know nothing about them other than 6 short questions that I could barely think of. Anyways, I'm making another appointment with the doc as per the request of Bruce. April 21st. Bruce has thankfully calmed down after last night. Maybe me acknowledging that he's real helped him calm down just a bit. I'm about to head over to Doc's. Hopefully she can give me some more insight into this issue. The doc seemed really impressed with me for trying to communicate with Bruce. She wanted me to try the same thing, so I sat down with a pen and paper, and although I warned her he might destroy it, to my surprise, Bruce did perfectly fine. So why did he destroy my notebook then? Oh well. Doc asked Bruce a bunch of questions that I can't recall, but when she was done, I tried to look at them and he pulled them away from my other hand and threw them at the doc. She looked at them and then over at me and told me that Bruce doesn't want me to see certain answers, but, well, that kind of weirded me out, but I guess everyone has a right to privacy, I guess. Bruce was comfortable telling me these things, though. He wanted me to talk to him more. We worked out a question system of 1 tap meaning yes and 2 taps meaning no. Not to pleasure myself with him, which is fair. Trust him with more movement so he can stay around longer. And that he felt helpless. I'm starting to feel bad for Bruce. I set up a weekly schedule with the doc on the way home, and I let Bruce take the wheel on the way home too. One of the more scarier things that I've done, but it's progress. April 25th. Things are going well. Bruce is a cool guy, and we've even set up a schedule between ourselves of when to make sure he can come out safely and take control of the hand. Not where I thought it was going, but I'm happy that it's going well. May 3rd. Alright, 4th session with the doc was really weird. She was happy we were getting everything figured out, but wanted to do some testing. She wanted to see how it was Bruce was in my head, so she wanted me to submit to some hypnotic therapy. I said, sure, what's the harm, right? Well, I don't know what happened, but when I came to, she had a look in her eyes. I can only relate when I used to go to those haunted houses. It's like she was in flight or fight response. Bruce won't talk to me now, and it's strange. He's still coming out when it's his time, but he's not answering any of my questions anymore. And I got a text from the doc when Bruce was sleeping, telling me to be careful? What happened when I was out? I want to know. May 15th. Bruce hasn't talked much since that appointment. Just a little rabble here and there, but the one thing that has really gotten my attention is that he really didn't want to see the doc anymore. I need to figure out what happened. Bruce has been agitated lately. It's almost like there's an energy coming up my body that's foreign. May 30th. Bruce can now move my whole arm. It's unsettling, but there's not much that I can do about it. Doc isn't returning my text. Guess I'm not finding out what happened. June 2nd. I don't know what's going on, and I don't like it, but Bruce isn't keeping to the schedule, and he almost crashed the car into a bus. I had to pull the emergency brake. I think he's getting my legs. I figured out, though, that he sleeps. I can feel it when he does, and I need to fix this right now. June 10th. I finally got a hold of the doc, even though I could tell she didn't want to speak to me, but she did fill me in on what happened. She told me that when she tried to hypnotize me, she thought the body would be in a neutral state and me and Bruce could both speak. But Bruce took control over my body like it was his, and the doc said she got some bad vibes. Her curiosity got the better of her and she evaluated him. He was off. Doc told me I need to take full control back. I'm done with dates. This is it. Bruce heard the phone call, and next thing I knew, I couldn't move my body anymore. Bruce could. I was stuck watching what I was doing through the pane glass of my own mind. Bruce is fucked in the head, and I know what he wants. He never was content with coexisting with me. He wanted to live. He wanted full control, and he manipulated me into getting it, and I had to watch. Through every reflection that he looked into, every window, and the ponds, and into the eyes of the doc when he was carving the skin off of her. He killed her because she was the only other person who knew about him. He's looking for a quick transition to my life. He even tried deleting this, but I guess he forgot Control Z works on Reddit. I'm scared. I barely got control back, but I feel that horrible aura coming back. I'm uploading this so everyone knows what happened wasn't me. I can't control Bruce anymore, and I don't intend on letting him do this anymore. I'm going into a psych ward, and I'm telling them to lock me up. And I need to hurry. Edit. Everything's fine now. Got it all worked out. No need to worry about Bruce anymore. Just keep scrolling and have a wonderful life. Oh, and feel free to PM me if you want to do an AMA. I'd be more than happy to meet you.
It was near the beginning of my 7th grade year, the first week of October. My school put 7th and 8th grade kids in with the 9th and 12th graders in the same school, so I was brand new to high school. At my bus stop there was a bunch of older kids from around the neighbourhood, and especially from the apartment complex down the street. I had met a new friend called Ben, who'd moved to our town that summer from the neighbouring town. He would ask me about everyone, and I was his guide in getting him the scoop when it came to anything or who anyone was. He had met everyone by this point, except for 2 people, Max and James. James was in the grade above us, and Max was in our grade. Both of these kids hadn't always been the cleanest, friendliest, or smartest kids in the school, but I never personally disliked them, even though I wasn't friends with them. I finally told Ben about them when he asked who they were, after we saw them go into the bushes with a bottle of black spray paint. They were going in to paint their heads for the day. This shows you what type of people they were. When we got onto the bus that was filled with the aroma of spray paint fumes, Ben asked me about them, and I told him that they weren't very smart or clean. This went on for a couple more weeks, at least until the beginning of November. They would eventually gravitate towards other colours of spray paint, like red, green, and blue, all most likely provided by their non-concerning parents. If you didn't know, it is illegal to buy spray paint if you're under 18, and since they were both 13 to 14, then they must have gotten it from their garages at home or something. We all got used to the smell of paint on the bus, and the initial laugh my group of friends and I had when we saw that the paint on James's head had dripped down his shirt and stained it had gone away, since it had been going on for over a month. This is where the story gets interesting. One day Max and James were at their usual spot in the bushes near the bus stop. This particular spot is located on the side of my neighbour's house by the road, and our bus stop is on the intersection of 2 neighbouring roads. Anyway, James got the smart idea to go to the back side of my neighbour's house with the black spray paint can. He knelt down and covered his mouth and nose as Max watched him and egged him on. At this point I see trespassing and destruction of personal property, so I yell, "Hey, "Cut that shit out, James." To this, James and Max were pretty surprised, as they thought they were being sneaky and no one was watching them. Then the bus came, so we all got on. They threw the can in the bushes like they did every day, and followed us onto the bus. Later on that day I was talking with my friends, telling them what had happened. When I got home I told my mum and dad, and they told me to inform the neighbour before we left for dinner that night. So I walked up to the neighbour's house and knocked on the door. I tell him what I had seen earlier, and he said that he'd found a black streak of paint on his back wall. I tell him their names and where they live if he decided he wanted to go talk to them. He said he'd be out the next morning to see what they have to say. The next morning came, and the neighbour was on his front porch talking with James and Max, and in short told them to come clean and repaint the wall that evening, or he would press charges on both of them. From what I know, James and Max both got their asses handed to them from their parents, as they were the ones providing the paint, and had absolutely no idea that the batty teenagers would try to vandalise someone's property with spray paint. However, they did clean up the streak, and I thought that was that. I thought they had learnt their lesson. The next day it was raining, so my dad took me up to my bus stop in his truck to sit and wait. During this time we saw Max swiping something with his right hand at James, but not knowing what it was, we thought he was just playing around. No. It was a knife, and according to Max he'd brought it to the bus stop to stab James for getting him in trouble. And it didn't stop there. I was later informed that the neighbour had told them who had told him that they did it, and that got me thinking that he would probably have tried to stab me as well. The day goes on with an odd bus ride, as my friend tells me that Max told him he had a knife. My friend goes and tells the teacher on bus duty that Max had this knife. When second period came, I was called down to the office and was met with the chief of police, a deputy, the superintendent, the principal, and the vice principal. I told them all what had happened, and they ended up calling Ben down as well as my friend, who told on Max and James. James got off free as he didn't have a knife, but Max got sent to juvie for a multitude of different reasons. It was about a year later. We were having our school pep rally for the homecoming football game. That morning I saw the cops at James's house, and I remember I hadn't seen him at the bus stop that morning. I figured his parents had got into trouble with drugs or something, as they weren't the best of people. However, I found out that James had a hit list for that day, as well as a plan, and told a classmate about it, who then told the police. On this hit list were many people, but no names were given to who he specifically wanted to go after. However, he'd planned on going into the school late, with a gun in his backpack. We had no security then, but we do now because of this. He was going to wait until the entire student body was in the gym for the pep rally, then would open fire. This definitely scared the shit out of me, and made me think of all my surroundings a lot more, and it made me anxious around large crowds. James ended up getting sent to juvie as well. I haven't seen them since 7th grade, and I'm in 10th grade now. It's scary to think what people can plan to do. To all the school shooter victims out there, I am sorry and could not imagine how you felt and are feeling. God bless you. So, to my 2 classmates who tried to get revenge on my school by trying to stab someone and plotting to shoot up the school, let's not meet again. Ever.
I work in the restaurant industry, and I've come across some pretty interesting people. Kitchens, I feel in particular, are the underworld of the service industry, often employing people with fringe elements. To put it briefly, people who are running from something in their past and want a sense of structure in their chaotic lives. I've worked with many interesting people, to say the least. Drug addicts, strays, social outcasts, and ex-convicts. There's a certain level of fear knowing that someone previously charged with aggravated assault is working right next to you in a fast-paced, high-stress environment. At any moment, that person could snap and take that 8-inch knife he was using to chiffonade basil and slit your throat if you pissed him off during the dinner rush. My good chef, who worked at many 5-star restaurants in Toronto, had many interesting stories to tell while we had beers after a crazy day at work. One of them was about an old guy named Michael Verney. A rather friendly old man, but quiet, and kept to himself for the most part. He always showed up on time, did his job, and went home. He was a great cook, but there was something that seemed off about him. Within his first week, all the cooks in the kitchen teased him and called him Vinny, the serial killer. He was a good sport about it, though, and was witty enough to dish it out as well, making him a respected member of the crew. Vinny would laugh, take it all in good stride, and often play along with the rest of the cooks. Those jokes were all in good fun, until recently. You see, his real name is Michael Wentworth, and in February 2019, Michael was charged in Kingston, Ontario for 3 murders spanning between 1995 and 2001. But that's not the only thing he's been convicted of. He's been linked to numerous crimes and has been convicted of armed robbery, disguised with intent, and possession of an explosive device, to name a few. It's crazy to think that any one of us could be working alongside a murderer who seems like a totally normal person. So, Michael Wentworth, let's not meet.
This is a retelling of an experience or encounter a friend of mine had many years ago. You see, back when I was 18 or 20 years old, I was in a little metal band with 4 others, and this incident happened to our bass player in his home, which was also where we would gather for practice. However, in a way, it involved all of us. Again, this is his telling of the incident. Also, this happened in South Texas in December time frame. It happened sometime late at night, according to him. It started around 11 p.m. or 12 a.m. He woke up randomly and just felt compelled to look out his window. He was sleeping on the living room couch that night. When he looked, he saw a shadowy figure crossing his yard. He said it looked like it was moving very erratically. His example was like how the doctor moved in the remake of House on Haunted Hill. Thinking he was just tired and half awake, he thought nothing of it and assumed it was just one of his neighbors, as they were known to cross through his yard at night like that. Shortly after that, he woke up with a feeling like someone was holding him down and making it hard for him to breathe, which sure sounds like sleep paralysis, except he claimed the whole time he could hear chanting and whispering around him, and no one was in the room with him. It eventually stopped abruptly after a minute or two. He sat up confused, terrified, and got a drink of water and tried to go back to sleep, which happened eventually. Shortly after that, it all happened again. Same feeling, same chanting and whispering. He always said he never knew or could understand exactly what was being chanted and whispered. Regardless, this episode ended. He once again was scared and confused. He chalked this up to maybe it was just a bad dream and managed to go back to sleep. Then it all happened once more. He woke up like something was holding him down and making it hard to breathe. The chanting and whispering all around him, though this time something new happened. He said he looked over next to him on the couch, and standing in front of the Christmas tree was a short, about 4 foot tall, shadowy figure that appeared to be cackling at him, though it wasn't making any other noise. This went on for what he said felt like forever, and this time when it stopped, he said forget sleeping and went to his bedroom and played with his bass guitar the rest of the night. Also, for the remainder of the night, coming from the direction of his sister's room, he would hear 2 knocks every couple of minutes. He didn't go back to sleep until the next night due to this. When the band and I gathered the next day for practice, he told us what happened. And of course we all laughed and said he was full of shit. Then he showed us that in his yard, he found what looked like footsteps tracked through his yard all the way to his front door. The steps were just that, footsteps, made from shoes, but no defining features to him, no imprint of the bottom of the shoe, just plain. Then when he told us around what time this started happening, and that it was about 3 a.m. the last attack happened, we all froze, because of what we realized we were doing that night. Our singer woke up randomly and was praying. Our lead guitarist woke up and just could not go back to sleep, feeling like something was wrong, off. And I, for no reason, woke up, turned on my lamp, and just started reading the Bible. We all realized that all of us, at the same time he was experiencing the incident, had gotten up at 3 a.m. and either prayed, read a Bible, or felt a sense of dread. Our drummer wasn't there the time he told us this, and he never said if he did anything that night as well. But the story had him spooked. This story has stuck with me for many years, and I still have no way of explaining it. But I figured you would all like to hear it. My buddy never had another experience like this again.
Blanca Leon, Tracy Russell, Jean McLaughlin, Gabriella Brown, Alice McGrail, June Larson, and Claudia Inman. 7 girls went missing 3 years ago on December 12th. The only thing these girls had in common were that they were all 13, and that they all lived in the same town. Race, interests, grades, social status, nothing else matched up. Blanca and Tracy were close friends, as well as Gabriella and June. But the others didn't know each other. Claudia was my sister. The last time I saw her was when I was heading back to my room. I had snuck out to hang out with some friends and was reasonably tipsy when I saw her standing in the hallway. She was wearing a Snoopy shirt and pajama bottoms. Her red hair was tousled in every direction like she'd just gotten out of bed. She just stared at me. I giggled and pressed a finger to my lips. Don't tell Mom and Dad. She didn't say anything, so I figured that was her way of agreeing to keep our secret. I kept on giggling as I slipped back into my bedroom. I wonder now if she was alone in that hallway. The next morning, I woke up to Mom screaming about Claudia being gone, and to call 911 because there was blood on her bed. It wasn't blood, by the way. It was just red paint. Someone had taken the time to spill red paint all over her bed and to write the number 7 on the wall. Up until this point, I was a shithead of a teenager, sneaking out, drinking, smoking. I was kind of the worst. But when Claudia went missing, I changed myself. I was one of the people out searching every day. I helped answer phones and comfort the other distraught families. I kept my family together as we prayed for Claudia's safe return. I know we'd never find her alive when the first body was found. It was Tracy. I became friends with Tracy's mom, Amelia, while this shit was going down. Amelia blamed herself for this, saying that the last thing that had happened between her and her daughter was an argument. Tracy wanted to go see her dad for Christmas, and Amelia was putting her foot down. Tracy screamed that she hated her and that Christmas was going to be the worst this year, before storming into her room and slamming the door. The next morning, Tracy's bed was covered in red paint, and the number 1 was painted on the wall. Tracy's body was found in California. For reference, we live in Indiana. It was 2 weeks after the girls had gone missing, and this poor minister walked into the church to prep for the morning services, only to find the mangled body of a teenage girl. It was worse than words can do it justice. Pictures got leaked on the internet, and although I told myself I shouldn't look, I did anyway before they were taken down. Tracy had been strung up from the ceiling, dangling from the rafters like a morbid marionette. Her eyes had been put out, and have you ever heard of the method of torture called the blood eagle? If you don't know what that is, I'll save you the trouble of Googling it. The victim is tied face down while the back is cut open, and the ribs are detached from the spine. The ribs are then spread out, the lungs pulled out and over the ribs to mimic wings. It's not pretty. That's what happened to Tracy. The killer had given one mercy, and that was that he left Tracy's school picture taped onto her chest, with her full name, address, and the date she went missing. Amelia had a full breakdown when the news was delivered. She ended up being institutionalized. I don't blame her. The autopsy confirmed that Tracy had been alive when she was cut up like that. Each week, a body turned up, scattered all over the U.S. Christmas had already came and gone by the time Tracy's body was found, but Claudia's presents were still under the tree that we had yet to take down. Normally, Dad would insist on taking it down the day after Christmas, but we just couldn't do it. There was an unspoken wish that that Claudia would be found safe and sound, that we could all have Christmas together. This wasn't a wish we'd get. The final girl taken, the final girl found. Claudia was found only 10 minutes down the road from where we lived, at the small St. Anthony's Church. She'd taken her first communion there. She'd been cut up like all the others, only this time she wasn't alone. Mr. Leroy Weber was found kneeling under her body, praying up to it as her blood dripped down on him. The monster we'd all been hunting down, and the unassuming algebra teacher for the 8th graders at the local middle school. I had Mr. Weber's class way back when. I'd thought of him as one of my better teachers. He knew how to make the material clear to us, and he never assigned homework. When asked why he did it, he'd just shrug and say, "Less for me to grade." He certainly didn't look like a killer. He was over 50 years old, wasn't over 5'7" in height, and looked like a strong wind could just blow him away. But then again, you probably don't have to be strong to put a knife to a child's neck and tell her if she screams he'll kill your entire family. That's how he did it. He never tried to deny what he did. He had his full confession written out and ready to go the moment the cops rolled up to the church. When we were told it was him, I saw red. If my dad didn't catch me leaving the house with a gun and the intent to murder Mr. Weber, I would have been in a lot of trouble. Amelia wasn't the only one who had to go to the mental hospital for a bit. I ended up joining her that night. I'm not saying that like it's a bad thing either. I'm actually glad I went. I probably would have completely snapped without the doctor's help. Mr. Weber never went for the insanity plea, but to be fair, I think it would have worked for him. Because his bullshit reason for killing all these little girls made me seriously contemplate busting out of the hospital and going to wring his scrawny little neck. He wanted to make them angels. He was the only thing that really tied them together. One time or another, each of those girls had been in his class. Each of those girls he claimed was perfect. He had to be sure he got the formula right. He practiced on cats, dogs. If he failed when the time came, then they wouldn't be angels. Just remembering that sick fuck makes me sick. What really takes the cake, though? He thought by killing them and making them angels, they'd rise up in 3 days. He said this so calmly and proudly to the cops that it was without a doubt that he was a loon. When he was reminded it had been more than 3 days that Tracy had died, and, well, she was still very much dead, he apparently wigged out. He tried to disarm one of the police officers to shoot himself in the head. He didn't succeed, but when his case went to trial, he begged for the death penalty. I know. I was there. I managed to get out in time for his sentencing trial. I was holding Amelia's hand as Mr. Weber sat in his chair. I'd almost expected him to be different. Maybe he'd have this dark smile or this insane laughter. But when he spoke, it was the same soft voice he'd used when he was teaching. Please, I failed in my mission. I need to pay the price for my horrid sins. It was the one thing he wanted, and it was the one thing he was given. I didn't attend the execution, but Amelia did. She called me when it was over. She was crying, saying she thought it would make her feel better, but it didn't. She felt so much worse. She almost killed herself after that, but I helped her get back into the hospital. We're still friends. We visit Claudia's and Tracy's graves together. All the angels were buried together. Angels. I wouldn't have called Claudia an angel while she was alive. She was an imp like I was at her age. I guess Mr. Weber saw something I didn't, though. After he was executed, I heard that his stuff was being auctioned off on a serial killer memorabilia site. Yes, those are real, and I really wish they weren't. But the big ticket item was his journal, his exact plan for what he was going to do to those girls. I ended up emptying my checking account to buy that shitty book. When it arrived, I spent all night reading it. His plan truly was to create an angel, a holy being of justice and the sword. His ramblings ranged from crazy to batshit insane, but he truly believed in what he was doing. and I think he may have succeeded. It's been 3 years. I've recovered best I can, but last night, Amelia and I were heading to the graveyard, where we were stopped by a bright light. We both fell to the ground and covered our faces. When I lowered my hands to catch a glimpse, that's when I saw her. It was Tracy. She was wearing the green dress she was buried in. Her innards dragged behind her from where her back was sliced open. Her eyes were emitting that bright light, white orbs that were practically bugging out from her shrunken face. Amelia sobbed when she realized who this girl was and ran forward, only for Tracy to back away, shaking her head. When Amelia reached to touch her, she shrieked, backed away as her hand crumbled away like ash. Tracy sobbed and leaped into the air, floating away until she was a star in the sky. All the graves have been torn open from the inside. Some of the other parents have claimed to see their child. Meanwhile, I'm waiting here at my parents' house, right at the front window. Right by my side are Claudia's unopened presents, covered in dust. I hope she comes home soon.
Every year for Christmas, we would gather around the Christmas tree. We would hold hands together as a family. We would all sing Christmas carols, pull bonbons, and eat delicious food. Everyone was there together. Me, my little brother, and my older sister. Then there were my cousins, around 5 of them. My aunts and uncles were there, and, of course, my parents were there too. And not to mention my grandparents from both sides of the family. All except for one person. One of my uncles. Uncle Jim, to be exact. He had always been a bit strange. His presence always brought down the Christmas spirit, kind of like a dark shadow. He would randomly start fights with people in the family and ask really weird questions that made people feel uncomfortable. I remember my mum screamed at him when I was younger, but I can't remember the exact details. He would also bring really strange gifts for people. At first they would look normal. An example. My grandma asked for a new picnic rug one time, and he got one for her, but it had a strange stain on it. My grandma just brushed it off and said nothing a good wash can't fix. My sister asked for a fancy pen kit one year. Innocent, really. My dad asked for a new shovel, and he got one. But my uncle used it, and he tried to clean it up. My dad found a piece of rotting meat in it. One of my aunties had asked for a dress that looked really familiar. I couldn't place it though. At least, not at first. I mean, I saw a familiar one worn by the mannequins posted around town by the police. Worn by a missing woman. Her name was Lara? Cara? I can't remember their name. But there were suspicions when we found what looked like a drop of dried blood on the hem. He said he must have cut himself when he was working with machinery and didn't realize, but still. There were other strange items given to members of the family, and they got worse and worse as time went on. He's supposed to be coming tonight. And he is late. He said he needed to grab a few more presents and needed to sort them out. This year, my mum asked for a hand in the garden, and I shudder to think what he is actually going to bring her.
I'm immobile, so I apologize in advance for any formatting issues, but this happened about a week ago. I go to school in a pretty safe city, though there recently has been some less than safe things going on. An assault, murder, rumors of human trafficking. I'm driving home for the holiday, and I usually take a more back roadway instead of taking the highway, because I like to avoid this one part of the highway due to traffic. I notice that my gas tank is looking a bit low, so I decide to stop at the nearest gas station, which happens to be in the middle of nowhere. There are no streetlights. I can't remember the last time I saw a house, and it's just surrounded by woods. I've been to this gas station before. It's the one I stop at every time I head home because the gas is usually cheap, and it's a nice brief stopping point to check in with my folks and let them know where I am and whatnot. Anyways, I finish pumping gas and drive my car up to the parking spot so I can get some snacks for the road and something to eat, because I have a long drive ahead of me and I was hungry. I go and sit down to eat, and as I'm eating my sandwich with a clear view of my car, and this car pulls up next to mine and two men get out. They start examining my car, but they start looking at the back of my car's window where I have my university parking decal, which clearly says what school I go to, where I park, and the dorm area I live in. Then they start peeping in my windows, and I had a few dresses out in the back seat. So at this point, it's fairly obvious to anyone that the car belongs to a college-aged, presumably female person. They're doing a thorough examination of my car, looking at the sides, the front, checking my tires. Alarm bells are ringing in my head, and I have a gut feeling that this isn't right. I toss my sandwich and get my pepper spray in hand and leave the store. The two men hear the bell of the door ding and immediately get in their car and drive off pretty quick. My first thought was that maybe I hit them or they hit me and were checking for damage, but I didn't see any at all, and they had pulled in a solid 10 minutes after me. I have no idea what they were up to, but nonetheless, it was unsettling and rather creepy.
I was about 16 when this happened. Honestly, if I was alone, I probably wouldn't believe myself. It was one of those crazy nights where me and two friends went on a nighttime excursion, mainly to get something to eat. It was about 2 AM, and our first stop on the journey was Chadwell Heath McDonald's. We walked down the main road from my friend's house, and we arrived there to the McDonald's being closed. Being the tenacious teens we are, we decided that we should go on to the next one. Travelling down the road, we headed to Romford, where there was a McDonald's close to a large group of nightclubs. While in Romford, we encountered a few friends who were out clubbing, which was fairly normal, especially considering it was a Friday. But in the end, after walking down Romford High Street, we found ourselves at yet another closed McDonald's. We were beginning to lose hope. So in the end, we decided to try out one last McDonald's, which was a little closer to Ilford, which from where we were was about 5 miles or so. So as we began our journey, we ended up passing through an industrial estate, which where we live are fairly common. Generally, it's just a quiet, creepy long road with closed buildings all around. This night, we were walking towards our goal, and that was when we saw the person in the distance. As we continued to walk, my friend Dean made a comment. He said, "Hey look, there's a drunk dude up ahead. You can see him swaying around." I looked again, and I started to notice that they were walking towards us. At this point, I was beginning to freak out. After all, this person was either drunk, or worse. As they began to speed up in their progress, me and the guys looked at each other, unsure. I'm a rational person, but this was getting to me. At this point, I said to everyone to carefully back up and see if we can make the last turning we passed, without drawing too much attention from this person. As we backed away, I began to notice features of this person. For starters, they were wearing white, and I certainly couldn't see their hands. This was ringing alarm bells in my head, especially considering the fact that I knew the area very well. and I knew that nearby was a hospital for psychiatric health. I told the guys what I thought, and suddenly fear shot across their faces. They, like me, knew that we were in some serious crap if I was right. At this point, my heart was pounding. It was close to pumping out of my chest when Dean spoke up again. Dude, if this guy's a loony, shouldn't we be making our moves faster? I then explained that if that's the case, if we run, they were more than likely to chase us, which would put us in a worse position than we were already in. To this, he quickly replied in a whispered shout, "Then what the hell do we do?" I at this point could distinguish a more noteworthy feature of the figure. A knife. A big one at that. He must have been hiding it in his shadow. After seeing that, I instantly noped out. Let's move. Fast. Just don't trip because it could cost you a whole lot more than a scraped knee today. At this point, we all burst into a sprint. And sure enough, the creepy guy gave chase. I suggested we split up. He'll only follow one of us, so the fastest runner should slow down so he'd give chase to them. Unfortunately for me, I drew the short straw. We came to an intersection, and I slowed enough to make myself look like an easier target. I told the guys to meet at the Ilford McDonald's, which, at this point, made sense considering it was the closest area we could all meet at, once I lose this guy, that is. I lost him easily enough, and sure enough, there they were. They'd already ordered food, which I know seems screwed up, but honestly, after all we'd just been through, would you blame us? I wish I could say after this that it was all over, but that just wasn't my luck. Surprisingly, we made it almost all the way back to Dean's place, when lo and behold, there he is, on the opposite side of the road. I was done with this, and I said that we should make a run for his house, so we did. I didn't think that he spotted us, as he was facing the other way. We got inside and locked the door, and looked out the window. At this point, the guy walked past us on the opposite side of the road. We all stood there, eyes glued on this guy. It was at this point I saw everything. He had a straitjacket on, untied, which explains why I couldn't see his hands before. But the knife I saw him holding was something else. It was huge, closer to a machete. I couldn't tell you now what exactly it looked like, but it looked damn sharp. After a while of watching, he took his blade to his hand. I'm unsure why, but that's just what he did. I just passed it off as a crazy guy being crazy. I don't know what that was, but afterwards, he looked straight in my direction. I was sure he didn't see me, but he damn well knew which house to look at. I told the guys to get away from the window, and as sure as the sun comes up, he started walking towards the house. He came over towards the window and appeared to be attempting to look inside. As soon as I caught a glimpse of his face, I hushed everyone into the kitchen. I know it was cowardly, but we all just waited him out. We had no adults home, and calling the police sounded like a bad idea. Just imagine explaining to the police why we were miles away from home on foot. It was just a bad idea. So, as the sun slowly rose, we heard Dean's parents coming in, excusing the trouble Dean got in for doing an all-nighter. We got off pretty easy. All I can say is, I learned my lesson. If it's past 2 AM, it's definitely a bad idea to go out, even with friends.
I posted this on a while ago, but it got lost. However, since it's been a year after the incident, I figured this would be a good place to share it, as it's about someone I never, ever want to come across again. It all started and ended the day after I took my last final at this community college. I don't know if he was a stalker, or if it was a break-in gone weird. So from the beginning, I was nervous that I was going to fail this one class, that I was not going to be able to receive my AA degree. Later in the day, I was out at the pool at my apartment complex with some friends and my roommates when I checked my phone and saw I'd passed the class. I got so excited, I told everyone we were celebrating because I was the last one to have a final. It was 3 days before I got to walk and graduate with this degree that I decided we should have some fun before we all went our separate ways. As it got later into the night, we decided not to go out and to stay in. We invited a couple more people over and went on with the night. Around 2 in the morning, people started to leave and head to bed. The only people left were my 2 roommates, both of the people they were dating, and one other friend. We were still messing around, and because our apartment was on the first floor and next to the pool, we went to go night swimming. As soon as we were done with that, I was ready to just hang out and be in for good for the night. My roommates and the other friend all left to go somewhere else for a little while, which was fine, nothing out of the ordinary for me to be home alone. I got some food and went to my room to hang out until they got back. The way my room is set up in our apartment, it's all the way in the back, farthest away from the front door and the patio door. My room is behind the kitchen and you'd have to go through the whole apartment to get there. Because our apartment was in the front of the complex and near the pool, it was near the front gate. At the time, the gate was left open because it was broken. I have never had an issue with living this close up front until this night. My room has one big window, and you can easily see in my room when I don't have the blinds or curtains shut. I had a closet with mirror doors, which if you look in through the window, you can see every part of my room in it. So, while I was waiting for my friends to get back, I fell asleep. The last time I looked at a clock, it was 3:30 in the morning. Also, key part in this, my bedroom light was on when I went to sleep. The next time I woke up, it was about 5:30 AM. There were slow flashes going off, like I had a strobe light going off in the corner of my room. I woke up really confused and thought it was my friends coming back to mess with me. Once my eyes got more adjusted, because the room was now dark, I realised that, in fact, it was not my friends messing with me, but a single man who was at least 6'1", wearing a green Nike hoodie with the hood on in the corner of my room by my closet, holding a phone up, taking pictures of me. Mind you, I had tiny Sophie shorts on, with one of my legs hanging out of my covers. I don't think he realised I'd woken up, and when reality sunk in, I said, "What the fuck?" And instead of coming at me or running out of my room, the man put the phone down and walked out of my room, not saying anything, not in a panic, just walked out. Me, being the dumbass that I am, I ran after him saying, "Hey!" I tried to follow him out, but once I got to the front door, I didn't see him anywhere. Ran back inside, woke up all my roommates asking if they were messing with me. When they said no, I called the police. I looked around my room and saw the only thing missing was my laptop. That was on my desk in the far corner of the room. The weirdest part about that was the fact that my laptop was in the farthest part of my room, with my door closed, and outside in the kitchen on the counter was 3 other MacBook laptops, 2 wallets, and at least a $300 speaker. But the only thing missing from the whole apartment was my laptop. Later on, I found out that the front door and the patio door were never locked when everyone got back, and the police couldn't find the guy or my computer. What made things worse was that the SIM disk from my camera was in the computer, so all my personal photos from the camera were now accessible to this guy. Some things I saw a couple of days later while I was getting ready to move out freaks me out even more. Like I said earlier, if you looked in my window you could see my closet mirrors and see just about my whole room. One thing that was super noticeable was my tapestry. It was a very distinct and different kind of tapestry. It has 2 wolves howling up to a moon, and is all black and white. One day, when I was packing my car, I happened to look up. It was starting to get dark, and as I looked up, I noticed, in the apartment above mine, through the blinds on the wall, was the exact same tapestry as the one that was in my room. What creeped me out even more was the fact that I had little purple lights I put on it from my mum, because she knows my favourite colour is purple. In that room above, the lights and the fan were switched out for purple ones, As if I wasn't creeped out enough, an all-black cat came up to the window, and my stomach started to feel weird, because the year before, I was still living in my room. I got a baby kitten that was all black. In the end, the guy was never found, and I never saw his face, which freaks me out to this day, and I hope I never come across him again. I never got my laptop back, and never found my SIM disc to my camera. My best advice to anyone in a college town is, no matter what, always lock the doors, because you never know what you could wake up to.
About 10 days ago, I retired very late. I had been up waiting for important dispatches from the front. I could not have been long in bed when I fell into a slumber. For I was weary. I soon began to dream. There seemed to be a death-like stillness about me. Then I heard subdued sobs, as if a number of people were weeping. I thought I left my bed and wandered downstairs. There, the silence was broken by the same pitiful sobbing, but the mourners were invisible. I went from room to room. No living person was in sight, but the same mournful sounds of distress met me. As I passed along, I saw light in all the rooms. Every object was familiar to me, but where were all the people who were grieving, as if their hearts would break? I was puzzled and alarmed. What could be the meaning of all this? Determined to find the cause of a state of things so mysterious and so shocking, I kept on until I arrived at the east room, which I entered. There, I met with a sickening surprise. Before me was a catafalque, on which rested a corpse wrapped in funeral vestments. Around it were stationed soldiers who were acting as guards, and there was a throng of people gazing mournfully upon the corpse, whose face was covered, others weeping pitifully. "Who is dead in the White House?" I demanded of one of the soldiers. "The President," was his answer. "He was killed by an assassin." Then came a loud burst of grief from the crowd, which woke me from my dream. I slept no more that night, and although it was only a dream, I have been strangely annoyed by it ever since.
They call him the Blind Painter. He was an old man in his early 70s, and he lived in a small house on the edge of town. He was an acclaimed artist, but he had been completely blind since the day he was born. Despite his disability, he had painted some of the greatest works of art anyone had ever seen. People came from far and wide to have their portrait done by the Blind Painter. As long as they paid the requested fee, he would paint a portrait of anyone. Nobody knew how he was able to paint with such skill, even though he couldn't see the person sitting in front of him. It was an uncanny ability that defied logic. I arranged for him to paint my portrait one day, so on the appointed day I walked up to his house and knocked on the front door. When it opened, I saw the Blind Painter standing there, leaning on his cane. His face was drawn and wrinkled, his eyes were milky white. He invited me in, and I followed him as he shuffled down a long, long hallway. In his studio, I handed over an envelope containing his fee. He thanked me and told me to sit on a stool. He stood behind an easel with a blank canvas on it and picked up his paintbrush. "Before we begin, I must warn you," he said. "Sometimes I paint too far." I had no idea what he meant. His paintings were always beautiful, so I was sure I would be satisfied with the finished product. I sat there, adopting a pose, as he started painting. Hours passed and neither one of us said a word. The Blind Painter never looked up from his canvas. His brush traveled back and forth, and his brow was wrinkled in concentration. Finally, he put his brush down. "I am finished," he said, and beckoned for me to come over and take a look. As soon as I set my eyes on the painting, I was horrified. He had painted me lying on the ground, surrounded by a pool of blood. My throat had been sliced open, and my body was covered in stab wounds. My dead eyes were glazed over, and there was a look of terror frozen on my face. "Why?" I asked, stepping back in horror. "Why would you paint something like this?" The blind painter looked at me with his sad, milky white eyes. "I warned you," he said. "Sometimes I paint too far. Sometimes I paint the future."
My father owns a small delivery service that operates out of Farmington, New Mexico. We mostly deliver small packages out to the middle of nowhere that are too much of a hassle for the larger delivery companies to bother with. My dad is the only employee, and we have a few pickup trucks and a trailer. One day we get a delivery out to Window Rock, Arizona, on the Navajo reservation about 2 hours from Farmington. My dad gets the call for the job while he's chilling with his Navajo friend, Travis, and his girlfriend. Travis mentions how he's got family in Window Rock that he hasn't seen in ages and suggests they go with him. I was about 6 or 7 at the time, and it was summertime, so Dad decides we all go together. He can do his delivery really quick. Then while Travis sees his family, we can go check out Window Rock. Big rock face with a large hole in it that goes to the other side. Pretty cool. We had a convoy in separate trucks since my dad was loaded down with freight. We decided to bring along some walkie-talkies so we can communicate with one another. We spend our time in Window Rock. Everything is generally uneventful, and we start heading home along the old highway with my dad and I in front, and Travis and his girlfriend in the truck behind us. I honestly don't remember most of the Window Rock trip, but this next part, I can never forget. We're somewhere on the highway between Window Rock and Gallup, New Mexico. It had just rained earlier in the day, and the road was kind of slick, so we were taking it pretty slow. On the left of the highway, there's nothing but sandstone cliffs, and on the right, there's a huge field separated from the road by a small barbed wire fence. We crest the top of this hill, and down at the bottom of the hill, we see what appears to be a very large dog, sitting back on its haunches in the middle of the road, facing the cliffs. My dad calls over the radio. "Hey Trav, do you see this big-ass dog?" Travis starts yelling back on the radio. "That is not a dog. Speed up right now and hit it." He sounds almost hysterical. He just keeps screaming, "Hit it. JJ, you have to hit it. Please, please hit that fucking thing right now." So my dad starts to speed up, and as we get a bit closer, I can begin to see it a little more clearly. It's covered in this brown, wiry, matted hair that appears to have dried blood all over it. It's still facing the cliffs, but the moment our headlights hit it, it turns and looks at us. And it has a face. I don't know how else to describe it, other than a mix between a bear's and a human's face. It looks twisted and distorted, and almost in pain. As we get closer to this thing, we start to realize it's actually fucking huge. Though it's still sitting on its haunches, it's about shoulder height with the hood of the truck. We get literally inches from hitting it when it lets out a scream that sounds like someone screaming as their lungs were filling with water, and it leapt backwards towards the field, landing just on our side of the barbed wire fence. Then, with another leap, it was gone from sight. Travis comes over the radio again. "Holy shit, keep driving, we have to get out of here, we have to go faster." He kept repeating that last part. We have to get out of here, and we have to go faster. Pretty soon, we're speeding like crazy, and just as we start to come near the outskirts of Gallup, we get pulled over. Travis pulls his truck over with us. Naturally, this makes the cop, a Navajo man himself, very on edge, and he immediately asks why Travis felt the need to pull over as well. Travis says, "We just saw a skinwalker a few miles back, and it's been following us." The officer turns white, stammers something about a verbal warning, gets in his car, and takes off. We do the same. We didn't see anything else that night, but when we got home, Travis refused to let us leave without taking some kind of Navajo totem that was supposed to keep it away.
So this happened to my boss a few days ago, and she is still shaken from her experience. I asked her if I could post it to see what y'all thought of it, because I posted my own experience here last week and received good feedback. And she agreed, and then changed her mind, so I took it right down immediately. And then she changed her mind again and asked for me to repost as long as I keep the details vague, so here it is. Be prepared to be thoroughly spooked. You see, I'm a dog groomer in a very small salon. A regular client dropped off her dogs and left, saying to call her when they're ready. And a couple hours later, she wandered back into the salon looking kind of dazed and disheveled. Now keep in mind, this is a very dignified, wealthy, older woman. Always carried herself rather proudly, always dressed to the nines. She was stumbling slightly and mumbling something, and we were finally able to make out that she felt dizzy and unwell. Now, we knew she was a widow because we also knew her husband before he had died, but we asked her if there was anyone we could call. And she said no family or friends or even neighbors she was close enough to. So we get her to the hospital, and it turns out that she had had a stroke, which was kind of what we had suspected. So now the problem is, she's in the hospital and we have her dogs, and there's absolutely no one to come and get them. No one who can keep them. So after closing, my boss goes to the hospital to see what can be done, and she offered to stay at the woman's house for the night with her pets and take them to be kenneled the following morning. She gratefully accepted and handed over her keys, asking for a few things to be picked up from her house and brought to her in the hospital. My boss says no problem and then heads out to her house. And when I say wealthy, I mean loaded. This woman lives in one of the richest neighborhoods in the country, out in a gated community on a lake 10 miles from town. She arrives, gets the dogs kenneled, packs a bag, and takes it back to the hospital. And the woman is trying to tell her that if she hears noises, not to worry. It's just her husband. Now, my boss doesn't pay much attention because she just assumes she's rambling because she clearly isn't well and isn't in her right mind. Until, that is, she's halfway back to the house and realizes that this woman is a widow because her husband shot and killed himself a couple years previously. In that house. We knew about the suicide, obviously. It wasn't a secret. It just hadn't occurred to her until then that he did, in fact, kill himself in the house she was staying in. She shakes off the spooks and tells herself to stop being ridiculous. Anyway, she gets back pretty late and goes to bed in the downstairs guest room she was told to stay in. She wakes in the early hours of the morning to hear the door to the finished basement open. The husband had his workshop down there, and it's also where he took his own life. The larger dog is in bed with her and perks up and then jumps out of bed and goes trotting happily towards the kitchen. She's laying there terrified and hears a low male voice murmuring something to the dog, and then footsteps coming towards the bedroom. They stop in the doorway, and then there's this long silence, and then they move away and head upstairs. They walk around upstairs for a while, then back downstairs with the dog following them the whole time. And then the door to the basement closes again, and the dog comes and gets back into bed with her. There was no one else in that house with her. She walked through it before she went to bed. Not really snooping, just checking things out because it's a large, beautiful house. And she had carefully armed the state-of-the-art alarm system as soon as she re-entered the house earlier. She just laid there until daylight, then packed up the dogs and got the fuck out, preferring to wait in the parking lot of the kenneling facility until they opened. She's obviously traumatized and confused because she's on the fence about the paranormal but has no other explanation for what happened. But as for me, well, I believe every word she said.
There was a teenage girl who was hired to babysit two young children. After the parents left, she put the children to bed and then went downstairs to watch TV. Suddenly, she heard a noise coming from the basement. It was the washing machine starting up. She was about to go and turn it off, but when she opened the basement door, the noise stopped. Shrugging her shoulders, She returned to the living room and zoomed watching TV. 5 minutes later, she heard the washing machine starting up again. She got up, opened the basement door, and started walking down the steps. She had only gone down a few steps when the noise stopped again. She went back to watch TV. 5 minutes later, she heard the washing machine yet again. Worried, she went upstairs, gathered the children, and ran over to the neighbor's house to call the police. They arrived a few minutes later and went down to search the basement. They found a man armed with an axe, hiding behind the washing machine. He had been trying to lure the babysitter down to the basement in order to kill her. I'm 24, female, and this happened at my old job. My mom decided that I needed a job, one that wouldn't cause so much stress, interfere with school, and could keep me out of trouble on the weekends. So I elected to babysit for the neighbors, cousins, and other families around my neighborhood. I was 17. I had a good time with kids, and it was the easiest way to make money. Just seeing the kids' face light up when they would see me made the job that more enjoyable. But the last group of kids I babysat were weird. I would watch them for days a week. I would help them with their homework and make sure that they were fed and fast asleep by 7 o'clock at night. Things were great for the first few months, but I began to feel like they were imagining things, or something, which is when things got weird. Marissa was the oldest. She was 8. Larry was in the middle. He was 6. And Alexis was the baby. She was 3. I can recall one particular night when I was swamped with homework. The kids were watching TV in the living room, while I was sitting at the kitchen table. Math wasn't the easiest subject for me, so it took me more time to concentrate on, being too focused on something else while babysitting isn't a good thing. A while had passed, until I realized that the house was strangely quiet. I looked up from the table to see the kid sitting on the kitchen floor looking up at me with those sweet eyes. "What are you doing?" I asked. Waiting to go home?" Marissa smiled. "You're already home, silly." "No, we live with you." "I'm the only babysitter, sweetie. I watch over you when your mom and dad need a night for themselves." I laughed. "But Jackson said that you are our mom. You gave us to these new parents because you had to." "Who is Jackson?" I questioned. "The man in my closet," she responded. "How long has this man been in your closet?" "I don't know, but he says that you're pretty and kind." "You have quite the imagination, Marissa," I chuckled. A sinking feeling of dread settled over me when I heard the floorboards overhead creaking because of someone walking around. The heavy footsteps frightened Larry and Alexis. They tightly hugged my legs while Marissa looked up at the ceiling. "Jackson's here! Jackson's here!" she clapped. I have never jumped out of my chair faster than I had at that moment. I scooped up the kids in my arms and I rushed them to the front porch. "I need you to go to Mr. Hughes' house and get help, but we want to stay here with you." "Just go!" I pushed her. They didn't really understand why I was being so frantic, but Marissa nodded before grabbing her brother and sister's hand. I watched them run off the porch and across the yard before I stepped inside the house to face whatever pervert was in the child's bedroom. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen sink, slowly crept up the stairs and stood outside of Marissa's room. I gently pressed my ear against the door. Muffled noises met my line of hearing, which caused me to swing the door open. Marissa's window was open. The cool breeze drifted into the room, caused alarm bells to go off. I know for a fact the window was closed prior to putting those kids in front of the TV. The dresser drawers were open, clothes strewn across the floor, and toys scattered on the bed. My hand searched the wall until I felt the light switch. I flicked the light on to see the man sitting in the closet, his back against the wall, his belt undone, and a toothless grin greeting me.
"You're even prettier in person."
My chest felt like it was tightening. I struggled to take a breath, but the sound of sirens filled me with relief. The man jumped up from the floor, knocked me into the wall, and ran out of the bedroom. I sank to the floor and let the tears go. The kids made it to the neighbor's house and banged on the door until Mr. Hughes answered. He was alarmed when he saw the bedroom light illuminate the backyard, so he called 911. Mrs. Hughes sat in the dining room with Marissa, Larry, and Alexis until the police arrived. The man hiding in the closet had apparently been living there for a few weeks. He was in his 40s, strung out on heroin and homeless. I don't know what happened to him, but that ended my babysitting career. My advice to anyone who might babysit in the future: please check the house before you get too comfortable. You never know what is going to happen.
Alright, so look, I'm finna tell y'all about one of the times I've been like the most scared in my whole life. Now, it's been a whole bunch of times I done been the most scared in my whole life, but this one was different because it was like I was with a group of people, but it was man, look, I just gotta tell you, I'm gonna give a story away. So look, let me tell you. So this what happened. So I grew up in Chicago, and now I stay in Atlanta. And this girl that I was messing with, I messed with her previously, but her and her sister, she had a bunch of sisters, man, and like everybody dated one of the sisters at some point, man. So she was having a party. Now we stayed on the west side in K-Town. They call it K-Town because all the streets start with K's. Costner, Kildare, Kilpatrick, all that. So we was headed to the party. It was 8 of us, but now it was like 8 or 9 of us. I'll tell you as the story go along. But everybody met up at my house. Well, some of them met up at my house, and some got on the train and took the train there and was gonna walk from the train. So 3 of my guys got on the train, and then the rest of us walked. So now while we walking, my guy, he got his little brother. Now his little brother was big, man, big, like, you know, I was a big dude, and I had my other guy, he was a big guy, but this guy was a big guy, man. So we all walking, man, and he's slow, he taking his time, man. And now, so while he taking his time, 3 of my other guys walk. So 3 guys took the train, and 3 guys plus 5, so that's 8. So 3 took the train, and then 8 or 9 of us walked. And then 3 of us out of the 8 or 9 that was walking walked ahead of us to go meet up with the ones at the train. So we sitting there trying to keep up with Big Bruh, cause you know he the youngest, and we just trying to keep up with him, and he just taking his time, man. So they walk up ahead, and we like, dang, they just walk up ahead like that. So they walk up ahead, and now they done walk completely out of range. We can't even see them no more. So we on the street where the party's supposed to be. We on the main street, standing at the corner, and we like, okay, well, dang, where everybody at? Now at this time, some of us might have had cell phones. I know I had one, but I don't think everybody had one, Man, that's crazy when I think about it. Like, man, we used to be all around the city, man. Just getting around, even back in grammar school, boy, we didn't even have no cell phone, man. We just be out walking and acting a fool and stuff, man. Dang, that was crazy. But anyway, it's wild, man. We feel like some savages, man. Man, I couldn't even imagine that today. But anyway, so while we standing there, we like, dang, well, I guess we gonna wait on them to get back. So all of a sudden, now we just standing there. Now it's me, 1, 2, 3, 4, me and 4 more guys, and we got the real big. So he's standing there. We all standing there, and we just looking. So now my guy had a guy that stayed a couple of blocks from there. He was with us, so he knew the area a little bit. We was on Cicero. he knew about Cicero and Jackson, maybe Cicero Jackson, I think. So he knew the area. Cicero and he was either Jackson or Gladys Van Buren, one of them streets. So he knew the area a little bit because he stayed on Cicero and Fifth Avenue. So he coming on, he say, "Hey y'all, let's go." I'm like, "What you mean, let's go? Like, this where the party at?" So all of a sudden, we see about 5 guys start coming across the street. Now they come across the street, so we looking, and I'm gonna tell you, I had this one of the worst feelings I ever had. Like my whole stomach heart dropped into my stomach, and then that just twisted up, man. He said, "Which one of y'all want to get knocked out first?" So we start, we all start looking around. We like, and that's it, man. He came up to my guy in the front, the one that stayed there. They come up, hit him about 2-3 times, man. Oop. Hit him, man, and his head hit against the wall, man. So me, I got kind of smart. Me and my guy, me and him were the same size, man. We played football and stuff, so we got back to back. And once we got back to back and put our backs against the wall. So we back to back against the wall. So they was trying to run up on us, and I might have got hit. Like we might have got hit a couple of times, but we ain't really catch it too bad because these boys we was 16, 15 or whatever. These boys might have been about, man, let me see. These boys might have been, they about our age, or some of them was younger, so they couldn't really get in on us good. And our real big homie, they flooded him, boy. They flooded. It was about 10 guys on him, man. They just flooded him, man. And then there was one guy with us. He was real skinny, man. They knocked him down, and they was stomping on him and stuff, and kicking him and all that, man. And man, it just like man, I'm talking about. It was guys coming across that street. It was just non-stop. Just guys coming, more and more people coming across the street, and it got real bad because now like the grown-ups started coming, man. So like at first, it was like the kids and the little teenagers and stuff, but then the grown-ups, the 20-some-year-olds and all this, they start coming across the street. So one guy come across the street, and he throwing ice and everything, man. He was throwing ice at us, man. So we like, oh, we finna die, bro. This it, man. We finna go out on our way to this dang girl party, man. And it probably wasn't even no party for real, man. Well, I don't even never know if it was actually a party happened that night. So as the big guys coming across the street, the only thing that saved us was somebody said Mike Jones. Now, for y'all that don't know, it was a rapper back, in the early 2000s or mid 2000s. His name was Mike Jones. He had this song like, "Back then they didn't want me, now hot they all on me. Back then they didn't want me." So he always say his name in every song, Mike Jones. So in Chicago, it was a thing where when every time, when the police coming, you just scream Mike Jones. Like, how people scream 5-0, 5-0, and they call it 12 now. But then it was Mike Jones, man. So somebody, I don't know who it was. It must have been an angel. It was God. It was Jesus himself who was looking out for me. And somebody hollered Mike Jones, man. And after that, them boys went on and they all just started running. And we took off running. And there wasn't no police, man. There was no police. We didn't see a cop, and we had to walk, so it wasn't like we just walked on and ran on down, and we was running, and my guy, he called our other guys. He was like, "Man, we just got mopped, man. We just got whooped, man." And we ain't seen no cops, so that had to be the Lord, man, just looking out for us, man. And when we caught up to our guys, now my guy, man, my guy Big Easy, boy, he was on the phone, man. I swear to God, man, we can go back down there right now. Come on, we go back right now. Don't think with it. So he just going, boy, he going clean off, boy. He going off. So And now the guys who we caught up with, man, them Negroes, man, they like, nah. They ain't out. You know what? They ain't even say nothing, man. The ones who was down at the train station, they ain't even say nothing, man. Not a word came out their mouth, man. And I got on the phone. I called my homie who was affiliated with the Latin Kings, man. I called him. I'm trying to get him to give me a gun, man. It's just stupid stuff, man. It's stupid. Don't get no gun, man. Don't just let it go, man. Be happy you survived and go home. You know, so that was that was crazy, man. And it was wild because every time I ever like drove past there or something, I never saw them guys out there again, man. Like not to that extent. That was like the only time I ever just saw a whole bunch of guys out, man. I don't know if it was just, you know, random, but that about the only time I seen that many folk out there that night, man. And you know, we went on, walked home, and the ones who stayed on the bus, they stayed far away, they got on the bus, went to the crib, man, and that was it, man. That was it might not have been a hood horror, you know. It might not have been a hood horror had that night went a little different, man. So, you know, I got a whole bunch of crazy truth hood stories, man, and I really ain't even started telling all of them yet. But I'm going to start letting these stories out, man. So, you know, y'all, man, we appreciate y'all for listening, man. And, you know, and I got some stories for you, bro. Oh, yeah, and I got to say, no cap, man. No cap. That story 100% true, man.
This happened to me in late July of 2018 while on a fishing trip with my son. My son was only 8 at the time of the story, and he loved fishing, so I wanted to take him out on the water for him to experience what an actual fishing trip was like. To cut to the chase, we took the boat out to sea, miles from the shore, and waited till around 3 a.m. to catch a specific type of fish that only came out during this time. So, my son and I were fishing, and I'd constantly be taking short breaks to move to the spotlight from up top. At one point, I'm on the spotlight when I hear my son say that there's something in the water. I looked to where he was pointing at, and could see something floating in the water about maybe 10 to 15 feet away from the boat. Keep in mind that it's completely dark out, so I grabbed the spotlight and shined it toward the object. To my surprise, it was a small raft made from what looked to be wooden planks with a small tarp on top of it. Upon this raft was not a single soul, and it kinda just looked abandoned, and it honestly reminded me of something straight out of Castaway. I told my now petrified son to step away as the raft then made contact with our boat, creating a big thud. I came down and examined the raft with my flashlight. This made absolutely no sense, and I was getting confused as to why there was a raft this far out at sea. Needless to say, we sailed away from that area and went elsewhere. The scariest thing, however, was the horrible thought about the people who once sailed that raft and how they met their fate. It still freaks me out.
August 14th, 2018. My life has changed more than I ever thought it could in the past 48 hours. I expected the way I would die to be simple, like old age or something. But I was wrong. It started on the last day of school, in July, when we were getting ready for a 6-week vacation. Brooke decided to have this giant party of all of the year in Parham Forest. There were going to be fireworks, as well to celebrate the end of term. Millie, my best friend, had managed to get us in. I remember when she told me, "Oh my God, you'll never guess what," she had yelled excitedly. "What?" I replied, turning off my phone. "I just managed to get us into Brooke's end of term party." I remember the look in her eyes. They were almost twinkling with her excitement and joy. I couldn't believe she thought it was so great. Everyone was going, and it wasn't like it was exclusive or anything. But then I remembered. Do you mean we are going into the VIP area? I asked hesitantly. Do monkeys climb on trees? Of course, she exclaimed loudly. I actually couldn't think straight. The VIP tent was known for the alcohol, dare games, and creating couples. Only the most popular guys and girls got in. I was a bit confused as to how Millie had managed to get us an invite, because we were popular, but not like the top of the ladder popular. It's on the 10th of August, so get your stuff packed, bitch, Millie said as she hugged me and walked away. I spent my walk home from school thinking about what was going to happen in that tent. I told my mom about the camping trip, and she took me to the store to get some new clothes and some various snack items like candy and stuff. August 10th soon rolled around, and I was ready to go. I pulled my hair into a long ponytail, and I wore a tight black dress with lace. Millie turned up to my house, wearing something that looked like it came off a stripper advertisement, but I really didn't comment. We got into our Uber and set off to Parkton Forest. When we got there, Brooke greeted us with hugs and kisses and showed us around the camp setup. Her parents owned a part of the forest, so she always was allowed to go crazy. I instantly knew something was up with these woods. These trees looked dry and almost bony. The wind had a certain edge to it, but there was no wind earlier. I soon realized that the VIP tent had been somewhat upgraded. There was a full-blown camping lodge thing with 3 jacuzzis outside of it, and a giant swing chair. The jacuzzis were stuffed with beautiful people, and I felt strangely like I belonged here. Millie practically ran into the lodge and screamed, "Jasper, I'm here, babe!" She threw herself into his arms and started making puppy eyes. So this is how she got in. I could have sworn she hated Jasper last week. I looked out of the window, and I thought I saw a flash of silver, but I wasn't sure. "Millie, babe, I'm just gonna go look for someone," I called to her, but she was too busy shoving her tongue down Jasper's neck to notice me. I looked around and I saw a man staring right at me. His eyes almost seemed red in the torchlight, but I wasn't one to make judgment. I walked over to him, but as I got closer, I started to realize he wasn't part of the party. He was stood straight up like a pole, or something in his eyes followed everything I did. He was wearing black joggers and a black hoodie. I called out, "Hello? Do you want something from me?" But he just continued to stare there. "Hey, Rose, who are you talking to?" Brooke yelled to me from the food stand. The people around her looked scared of me, and when I looked back, the man was gone. I stopped, dead in my tracks. Every ounce of excitement in my body was replaced by fear. Who was that man? Why could I only see him, and why was he staring at me? I looked down at my hands to see that they were shaking. I pinched my arms to see if I was dreaming, but no, I was awake and well. I rushed back into the camping lodge and asked Millie where the rooms were. She said she didn't know, but Jasper told me some really complicated route, and I didn't understand. He offered to take me and I agreed. He took me down a series of hallways, and he told me that his parents knew Brooks, so he knew how this place was built and where stuff was. "Here's the room corridor." Brooke wrote names on chalkboard outside of the room so you know where you're going to stay. I thanked him for the help, and I was about to go into my room when he grabbed my arm and kissed me. I pushed him away and screamed at him that he was obviously dating Millie, so what was he doing? And you know what he said? "I don't see Millie anywhere." I was disgusted. I glared at him and went into my room. Honestly, it was amazing. There were 4 posters, a double bed for me and Millie to share, and an in-suite bathroom. I unpacked my bag and put my stuff into the wardrobe. I sat on the couch next to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked out. I noticed a reflection of a tall figure behind me. "Jasper, go away!" I yelled, turning around. It wasn't Jasper. It was the man I had seen outside. I was nearly sick. He was holding a carving knife and some sort of black object. I stood, paralyzed with fear. I didn't know what to do. I had locked the door. I would have heard him come in. So how did he get in? I didn't know and I really didn't care. All I knew was that there was a man in my room, and I didn't know what to do. Suddenly, he threw the black object at the window and it shattered. I screamed and jumped out of the way. Another 4 men walked in through the shattered window. The trees were thick and obviously concealed them when I was looking out. I screamed again and yelled, "Help me! Bring weapons!" over and over, but nobody came. The man rushed towards me and punched me on the side of the head. I felt a sudden rush of blood, and then I began to feel like I was falling through the depths of the earth. Then everything went black.
It wasn't a cat. A bit of a preface here. I was around 10 or 11 years old when this happened. Old enough to stay home alone, but not old enough to recognize some red flags. I attended camp over summer, the typical 8-3 routine. My house sits close to the end of my street, which forms a U, but for some reason the bus drive would never drop me off at my house. I would always get dropped off at the end of my street, while I would toddle myself along back home. Both my parents worked late hours, sometimes not getting home until 8 p.m, and it would be very expensive to hire a babysitter for 4 or 5 hours a day, 5 days a week. So, starting 6th grade, when the bus dropped me off at home, I would be by myself. I do the usual middle school routine: play games online and watch TV. Occasionally, my neighbor's cat would come into my backyard, and I would feed her and pet her as a way to get outside. The only computer in the house was in my dad's workroom, which has a window overlooking the deck, and a window overlooking the side of the house. We have large bay windows in the living room, dining room, and the kitchen of my house. And since we sit on a hill, you can pretty much see the entire backyard from a nice vantage point. So most days, when I got home, I toss off my backpack and go right into that room. And you could see me walk from my front door and pop up by the computer from the outside. Unfortunately, this will lead to something that I had forgotten about, up until now. When I got off the bus, I did as expected: go to my dad's workroom and play computer games. About 30 minutes into this, I heard a faint meowing coming from the outside window. I paused the game and looked outside, thinking maybe my neighbor's cat had wandered over. Nothing. I just sat back down and resumed playing, only to hear the meowing again. It was quiet, but noticeable, and so I checked the other window. Nothing again. This routine happened for a good 10 minutes or so, and eventually I got frustrated and went into the living room to watch TV. Not even 2 minutes later, meowing from the window. I was sitting right beside. Now I was confused and a little creeped out. So I shut the blinds and kept trying to watch TV. Meows continued, but only when they came from the window behind me did I jump and leave the living room. Officially skeeved. I went into my bedroom, where the blinds were down, but still cracked for some sunlight. I tried to read a book, only to hear the meow come from the outside of my bedroom window. This was enough to make me call my dad, concerned that maybe the cat was hurt. But I couldn't see it to be sure. He said he would have the neighbor check it out and call me back later. 10 minutes go by, and I get a call from Dad, saying he was coming back home from work. Nothing urgent in his voice, just that his job had gotten cancelled, and he could come home early. I thought nothing of it, and when he got home, did I realize the cat noises had stopped. Fast forward to the present, and I asked my dad about the strange incident, thinking it was funny the cat followed me around. What he told me next made my blood run cold. After I called him, my neighbor did indeed come to check on my house. What he found were large footprints, leading in circles all around the house, clustered close to the walls, so that even if I looked outside, I wouldn't see anything. Someone had been stalking me through my house, seeing where I was through the windows, and making cat noises to try and get me to come outside. They must have known I was home alone, since it was easy to see me walk by myself down the street and let myself in. My neighbor immediately called my dad and searched the property, but found no one. The police weren't called, since there was nothing but footprints that led off into the woods and got lost. And I never saw anyone. My dad stayed home with me for the rest of the week. It sickens me to know that there are people who would use these tactics to try and lure kids out of their homes, and from there, do whatever they want with them.
Recently in my area, a trail of kidnappings have been taking place. This is unordinary. I've lived in this area for my entire life, and there's been less kidnappings, murders, and major robberies than I have fingers. And the way these kidnappings have been taking place are also unordinary. The reports would state that people would be driving along the mountain roads at night and come across a mannequin, either in the middle of the road or on the side. They'd pull over thinking that the mannequin was a person. After realizing what it actually was, they would rush back to their car and drive away, while calling in to the local station. At least once they got their service back. Not long after these reports came in, the police began to trace these back to some disappearances that had been taking place in the area. I didn't know any of this until it was too late. The story begins as I was coming back early from visiting a friend that had moved away for college. At a point during the 5-hour drive, I was going to have to go through a pretty long mountain road, which is exactly why I had to come home early. The day I was originally planning to leave, a huge snowstorm was said to be moving in that day. So trying to be a sensible person, I decided to just cut the trip down a day. The idea of me staying an extra day had been thrown out there, but I didn't want to miss both school and work that day, so I made what I thought was a responsible choice. Now, being the giant pansy that I am, I left pretty late into the night because I hate driving on busy roads with lots of people, so I left around 8 p.m. By the time I reached the mountain road, it was past midnight and I couldn't see another car for miles. That's when the storm rolled in. It started off small, just a few lazy flakes fluttering down from the sky, before turning into a blinding haze of white. I considered turning back, but the nearest place of any kind to sleep at had been nearly 2 hours back. I also reasoned with myself that it might just be easier to try and slowly make my way through the mountain alone than trying the next day with more people. After my decision, I soldiered on through the snow. As I continued further and further into the mountain, the storm only grew in ferocity. By the time I had made it halfway through, I was driving the bare minimum speed to keep my car moving. All I could see was white storm and darkness. My headlights were unable to pierce through any of it, making my surroundings completely imperceptible. This forced me to slam on my brakes when a silhouette came close enough to my car that I could actually perceive it. Even going less than 25 miles an hour, I nearly couldn't stop in time. Whoever it was stood less than a few feet away from my car, but even then I could hardly make out any details about this person. I sat in my car trying to calm myself. After my heartbeat settled, I realized what was actually in front of me. There's a person out here? I shoved my door open, which proved to be a difficult task because of the overbearing wind. As soon as I stepped out into the snow-covered road, my door was slammed shut. Great. If this person's a freak, I'm stuck out here. This thought genuinely made me consider climbing back into my car and driving around this person. Most smarter people would have done that. Instead, I trucked through the howling winds and inches of snow to the front of my car. Hey! What are you doing out here? I shouted over the storm. There was no response. The figure just continued shaking with each strong gust of wind. 1,000 terrible ideas went through my mind as to what kind of person this could be. But then another stream of thoughts told me why this person wouldn't respond. What if someone let them go out here hours ago? They'd be freezing, barely clinging to consciousness. They might not be able to hear me over the winds. They might be completely focused on something entirely different. Anything to calm my nerves. It was a scenario like that which pushed me on. I started forward, but as soon as I took my first step, I completely froze. Suddenly the cold fell away. The sound of the storm barely registered with me anymore. All that really mattered was what I was looking at. A mannequin. A mannequin mannequin standing in the middle of the street. I looked it up and down, still petrified. That's when I noticed the stakes that were barely poking out of the snow, as if someone had staked the mannequin to the road itself or something else underneath of it. Something heavy enough to hold it down in these winds. Suddenly, movement and my senses all came back to me at once, and I ran to my car. I forced the door open after fighting with it for several agonizing seconds. I climbed into my car as the door was once again slammed shut behind me. I threw my car into reverse and backed just far enough that I could go around it. I pushed my gear back into drive and slammed my foot onto the gas pedal. My tires spun for a moment before the car started moving forward again. I had a second of relief when my car broke free from the snow. Then my blood ran cold. I heard something slap the back of my car. I spun around in my seat, still pressing down on the gas. My back door had been pulled open and the automatic light shone bright. Bright enough that I could just make out the silhouette of a person. An actual person. But then I was gone. My back door was ripped away from whoever it was and was forced to shut as I sped down the snowy path. My car left the mountains over an hour later. An hour of non-stop paranoia. Paranoia that I would encounter another mannequin. Paranoia about whoever that was and what they were trying to do. My chest ached by the time I escaped the frozen trail and returned to civilization. Now that's technically the end of the story. I took my time trying to figure out how and who I would tell this story to. I had to figure out what had happened that night. I was with some friends one night when we got on the topic of scary stories. Naturally, I brought this up, and when it was finally over, they asked me if I had heard about the other incidents of this happening. I said no, so they proceeded to tell me about the kidnappings that I had been completely unaware of. They had only started 2 weeks before I left on my trip. I don't keep up on the news too well because, again, nothing ever happens here. Hearing this nearly sent me into shock as all the scenarios of how that night could have gone flashed through my mind. I could have slipped on my way back to the car, the wind could have picked up, locking me out of my car. What if my car had taken just a moment longer to break free of the snow? And that man, whoever he was, could have gotten into my car and done something to me. I don't know. If any of that had happened, I probably wouldn't be here.
So I've kind of been wanting to post this for a while, but a combination of technical difficulties and residual fear have been preventing me from doing so this far. Now, though, it's the middle of the night and I've got nothing better to do, so I'm going to get this off my chest. I grew up with parents who were reasonable, loving people, but who were also more than a little paranoid when it came to the internet. Anything that allowed anonymous communication in any form was banned, point blank, from the household. Even Club Penguin wasn't allowed because you could chat in it. Naturally, when I got my first laptop at 12, it was a piece of crap, gotten only because all my homework that year was online. The first thing I did was start trying to talk to people online. I wasn't going in chat rooms or anything because my parents' warnings still resonated with me, but I wasn't avoiding contact either. I ended up making a DeviantArt account. I know, cringe. Where I didn't do much posting, as I lack artistic talent. In spite of this, however, I was contacted via private message by a guy who I'll call Joker, because his profile picture was of the Joker. And that should have been a warning sign in of itself, honestly. Joker just started talking to me out of the blue. I think I'd commented on one of his pieces or something, and he reached out to thank me for my kind words. We started talking. It turned out we had a lot of common interests. We played some of the same games, liked some of the same cartoons, etc., and he seemed like a really, really nice guy. I think it was maybe a week or two in that the first uncomfortable thing happened, even if I didn't exactly think much of it at the time. The two of us shared a somewhat misanthropic view of the world. So there were a lot of dark jokes being passed back and forth between us. Sometime about a week after we first started messaging, he casually mentions thinking that the world would be better off without it. I sent him a sad face and assured him that it wouldn't, as I quite liked talking to him. He didn't say anything more about it then, so I assumed that was it. It wasn't. Joker talked about suicide a lot. His talking about it quickly morphed from passing commentary to long, graphic rants about how much he hated himself and wanted to die and what method would be best for him to do so. I spent hours talking him down over chat, terrified that one day I wouldn't be able to do enough and he'd actually do it. His messages started to get creepy in a different way. He started telling me how grateful he was to have me, how no one had ever cared about him as much as I had, how important I was to him, how he couldn't live without me, how he'd just die if ever he were to lose me. He was obsessed. Well, one day, a couple months in, my laptop breaks. It wasn't too bad, but it still took a couple of days before everything was back in working order. I logged back into DeviantArt to find dozens of messages, all from Joker. They started off normal, but quickly became frantic after I didn't respond. The last message he had sent was along the lines of, "I can't take this anymore," followed by a link to a picture image. The image was a pair of slit wrists. The cuts were deep and fairly fresh looking too, with red inflamed edges and the beginnings of an ugly scabbing just beginning to settle over the top. I was horrified. I quickly messaged him back, terrified I'd just lost a friend, and he responded. "I thought I'd lost you," he said. "I thought you'd left me. I couldn't handle the pain without you. Don't ever do that to me again." I said I wouldn't, and he seemed relieved. He only got worse from then on. It reached a point where practically our every conversation consisted of him either professing his obsession with me, threatening suicide, or both. The stress was keeping me up at night. I was terrified that soon I'd open up the chat and see nothing. I was utterly convinced it was my job to keep this guy alive, and that I was failing miserably at it. Joker kept escalating, until one day, nearly a year in, he finally said something that frightened me so badly I had to leave. Joker started talking about how I was the last good person left on this miserable planet and stuff like that. He waxed poetic about how much he wanted to kill himself and said that he'd finally found a way to truly be happy. He said the only way he'd ever be able to find happiness was in killing himself and taking me with him. That way we would always be together, free from the cruel weight of the world. He started going into very detailed, very graphic descriptions of how he'd kill me. A lot of them involving carving out my heart, then clutching it to his chest and laying beside me as he took his own life too. I was terrified, enough so that I did what I should have done a long time ago and deleted that account. For years following that incident, I never spoke to anyone online. Even to this day, actually, there's still a lingering sense of dread when it comes to online interaction. So, to the boy I thought was my first internet friend, I don't know what your deal was, whether you were mentally ill or purposefully malicious or some combination of the two, but whatever the case may have been, let's not meet.
The following story is 100% true. Once upon a time, there was a 10-year-old girl who lived in London in a very old house. She hated the house. It was cold and damp all of the time. Plus, none of her friends would visit because it was believed by everyone in the neighborhood that a ghost lived in the house. The little girl was curious about the ghost, but nobody would talk to her when she asked questions about it or about the history of the house. The house was very scary, and some nights were worse than others. One night, when she was in her room reading, the lamp suddenly went off. She thought the light bulb had died. She did not want to bother her mother, who was already sleeping, by asking for a new bulb. So she put down her book and prepared to sleep. All of a sudden, there was a quiet knocking on the window next to her bed. She saw the reflection of a boy, about her age, reflected on the window glass. The girl turned to look in her room, but saw nothing. She got out of bed and went over to her lamp. She felt something wet on the ground. She flicked on the lamp, which now worked, and saw a red stain where she was still standing. Then it disappeared. It wasn't blood, because the red was too bright, almost pink, like paint. She scratched at the purple wall of her room, and, believe it or not, behind the purple paint was pink, the same dark shade that had been on the floor. The girl ran out of her room toward her parents' room, but then she saw something that really made her mouth open to scream, though no sound came out. The attic door was right above her staircase, really high up. Only her dad could reach it. Hanging from it was a noose. The girl ran back to her room, and there was a body in her bed. She grabbed her phone to take a picture. She wanted proof. She wanted to know in the morning if what she saw was a dream or real. She took a picture of her bed and, without looking at it, ran to get her mother. Grumpily, her mother came up the stairs. The girl pointed to where the noose had been, but now it was just a piece of string from her mother's sewing kit. She led her mother up to her room to show her the child's body, but now there was nothing. As her mother turned to leave the room, the girl remembered the camera. She grabbed it and turned it on, showing it to her mother. There was no longer a photo of her bed. Instead, there was a photo of a teenage boy, with a red mark around his neck and pink paint all over his torn clothes. Her mother told her to stop joking around. However, her mother had an extremely worried look on her face. When asked what was wrong, she said, "He is back." This story was brought to you by the Frightening Finds YouTube channel. Thanks for listening, and I hope you have a frightening day.
This happened to my brother and I in the summer of '95. I was 24 and he was 22. We lived with our mom out at a place called Whispering Ranch, which was a desert community about 10 to 20 miles in either direction from the nearest town. The roads were not paved, and we did not have electricity or running water, so we had to haul our water in from the nearest town, and the only means of lighting that we had were kerosene lanterns and flashlights. One day our mom asked us if we could walk over to her friend John's place to pick up some tools that she was going to need for a project she was doing the next day. We told her yeah and headed out across the desert. It took less time because John lived about a mile away. There would still be a half a mile between us and the road to John's house. So anyway, we get to John's and sit under some shade and start drinking water while he goes and gets the tools for our mom. He comes back and gives us the tools. We put them down and decided to stay and visit a little bit because it was scorching. After the sun set, we realized it had gotten darker. The only means of light that we had was a flashlight. We told him we had to leave, so we grabbed the tools for our mom and said goodbye. We left and started to walk down the road. While walking home, we decided to cut across the desert to get home faster. We got halfway across the desert before it sounded like something was following us. At first, we didn't pay attention to it because out there it wasn't uncommon to hear an animal at night. The further we walked, the sound of something breathing got closer and closer. My brother stopped and turned to see what was following us. That's when he saw it. Two glowing red eyes staring at us. He tugged my arm, shushing me. He told me, move slowly, be quiet, and don't look back. I didn't listen to him. Turning around, I saw the eyes and screamed. We took off running towards our moms, and that's when it started chasing us. I ended up tripping, hitting my face on the ground. Between the night sky and our light, there was no telling where we were going. When I got up, I saw the red eyes. I screamed for my brother. He came back and grabbed me, shoving the flashlight in my hand. We took off running again, and so did the thing chasing us. By this time, we were scared. There was nothing to protect us from whatever was chasing us. Somehow, for a brief moment, my brother and I got separated. That's when I fell again, rolling over onto my back. I sat up, pointing the flashlight in the direction of the animal. That's when I saw what was chasing us. It was huge. I imagine if it stood, it would be about 8 feet tall. It had long, shiny black hair, a snout like a wolf, and long, sharp claws, and it smelled like rotten flesh. It snarled at us, looking with its dead cold eyes. We were scared, frozen in place at the sight in front of us. My brother snapped out of his trance, dragging me up to my feet. We wasted no time running as the creature screeched at us with a horrendous force. The creature pursued us quickly. I could feel its hot breath on the back of my legs. I thought it was going to get me at any second. Just then, the light of a bonfire came into view. We ran towards it, seeing my mom and family members. We collapsed in front of them, terrified, and for a few minutes couldn't even talk. They looked at us in confusion, wondering what we were freaking out about. When we told them what happened, nobody believed us. They laughed at us and called us chickens because they said there was nothing out there to be afraid of. The next morning, I woke up and went into the kitchen. My mom looks at me, wide-eyed. In a shocked tone, she yells at me. Confused, I replied, "What do you mean, Mom?" She points to my thigh. "Look!" On my right thigh are 3 large scratch marks, almost blood red. Last night during the chase, it must have scratched me. I guess I didn't notice at the time due to the adrenaline rushing through me. Well, needless to say, we never walked out there after dark again.
About 7 years ago, I was 20 years old, going to college and trying to make a little extra money. I picked up a job working in Flint, Michigan as a live-in caregiver for a 98-year-old woman named Lillian who had Alzheimer's. Honestly, I wasn't trained the way I should have been to properly care for her. I did a lot of research and tried my best to learn everything I could to make the situation as comfortable as possible for her. Needless to say, though, I did get frustrated sometimes. One of those times was a hot summer night, probably around 2 a.m. when I woke to Lillian screaming from her bedroom. I ran to her to find her sitting in her laundry basket. After helping her up, I noticed that she had wet herself. I took her to the bathroom to get her cleaned up. She told me she thought that the laundry basket was the toilet, and after she sat down in it, she couldn't get out. I felt so sorry for her. I tried my best to reassure her that it would be okay. I told her I would clean everything up, run her laundry again, and stay up the rest of the night just in case she needed anything. Once Lillian fell back asleep, I threw her laundry in and decided I had time to sneak out for a quick cigarette. Yes, I'm one of those nasty, horrible smokers. I decided to sit in my car to use the air conditioning to stay cool and call my best friend to see if she was still up so I could vent a little. Also, I just wanted to talk to someone, as it was late at night and I was alone in my car. Being female, we're wired to be nervous about being alone at night, unfortunately. I hadn't been on my phone for more than 2 minutes when I got a weird feeling. Something was telling me to look over my left shoulder. When I did, I seen a younger guy, maybe late teens, early 20s. Early 20s, walking down the sidewalk in my direction with a sweatshirt on. His hood was up. Now, remember, this is in the middle of summer, so immediately I felt as though something was off. But who am I to say this guy isn't cold? One of my flaws is being too afraid to hurt people's feelings, even when the situation calls for it. I knew in that moment that I needed to lock my doors, but I didn't want this guy to hear the sound of my doors locking and feel like I thought he was a criminal just for walking down the sidewalk. My body is screaming warning signs at me. The hair on the back of my neck was standing up. It felt hard to breathe. I knew my friend was still talking, but I couldn't really hear a word she said. I was afraid to turn my head to see where he was. I was frozen. Suddenly, my friend's voice became clear to me. She was yelling at me. "Hey, why aren't you answering me? What's going on?" I turned my head to the right just in time to see him reaching for my passenger door handle. Without even having time to think, I somehow managed to reach up with my left hand and hit the lock button for the doors just as he started pulling on the handle. His right hand was in the front pocket of his sweatshirt. He seemed to have been holding on to something, and with his other hand, he was pulling my handle with such force that the entire car was jerking back and forth. I didn't move. I didn't scream. I just watched him. I remembered his eyes were staring into mine. He looked angry. Just as I start to think, this is it. He's gonna get in somehow. He's gonna hurt or kill me. He suddenly stops. He stood there for a quick second and then turned and ran away. In that moment, I burst into tears. I was scared, angry, and confused. What just happened? What was he trying to do? Kill me? Steal my car? Is he gonna come back? Lastly, even though I was happy about it, why did he suddenly stop and run away like that? I called 911. The dispatcher asked me if there was any way for me to leave the area. I wanted to, but then I realized Lillian. I needed to get back in that house, but I was terrified to step foot out of my car. I took a few deep breaths and decided I didn't have the time to think about it. I needed to make sure she was okay. I got back in the house and immediately went to her room. She was sound asleep. I felt a huge sense of relief. I took a walk through the house and checked all the doors and windows to make sure we were safe. Everything was secure. I sat on a couch in the living room in the dark and waited for the cops to come. For those of you who don't know much about Flint, this type of call is not their top priority. It took them over 4 hours to respond. At that point, obviously there's nothing they can do. He was long gone. I still think about that night more often than I would like to admit. The what ifs are the hardest part. All I know is I hope to never be in a situation like that again.
You have always hated going to the dentist, but today is the day you can't chicken out. You have a mouth disease and it needs treatment, so like any sane human would do, you get in your car and drive. You pull up to the rusty metal bars and get out. The dentist's office shouts 100 terrible things to you through its peeling walls and moldy plastic tooth that hangs just above the entry. You shudder and step out of the car and wait, debating on whether to go inside. You know you can't stand there forever, and it's getting chilly, so you sigh and push through the dirty, opaque window. A bell inside rings, and to your surprise, the inside of the horrid building is hidden half bad. A woman greets you with a smile. "Good morning. Have a seat and I'll be with you in a moment." You question her for a second, but take a seat. The waiting room is decorated with all sorts of different teeth models. The chair which holds you even has a giant toothprint in the middle. It is creepy, but somewhat normal for a dentist office. You are getting acquainted with the surroundings when the lady at the front desk shouts your name. You stand up and head over to sign whatever paper she gives you, but there's nobody there. "Hello?" you ask. "Go through the door," a voice answers back. You look at the door, probably the nicest thing in the whole office, and go through it. Just as you take a step into the ever-winding hallway, the woman lunges at you and pushes you into a dentist chair. You scream and push her off, but something is wrong. You feel woozy and drugged, and when you wake up, you have no teeth.
This is a small break off of something that happened during the spirit thing that lived in my room in my last story. It is something that still freaks me out to this day. So, I was 17, and this was around the time that things had been happening in my room at night. Check last story. Anyway, to recap, I live in a farmhouse that is in the middle of nowhere. It's not uncommon to hear weird noises outside that could be created by animals or distant cars. However, what I heard this summer night was a sound that I will never forget. I had been home alone when my parents were at a church function about 20 minutes away. Nothing had happened that whole night, and due to the recent happenings of my room, it was rare to have a normal night. My parents rode home with my older sister and had been in her house and needed a ride home, so I was leaving to pick them up when the first incidents happened. I had just stepped out of my house and was walking to my car. All of a sudden, this horrible, loud, high-pitched scream started coming from the barn about 200 feet from my house. I instantly ran to my car and turned on the lights and locked the door. I sat in that spot for a second because I was worried that someone was hurt and maybe needed help, but then I realized better. We live in the absolute middle of nowhere on a 164-acre farm. We are very secluded by a long gravel road. There was no way that someone had made it to our barn. I picked my parents up and asked my father to make sure, but there was nothing. Not a single thing was moved, and the doors were even locked in the barn. My mother had tried to brush it off the being coyotes or an owl, and I had almost believed her until it happened again, about 2 weeks after the first screaming incident. I had just gotten home from working a late-night pool party. I'm a lifeguard in our local pool, and it was maybe 11 o'clock. My parents had left the porch light on, this being something that they often did in the nights that I would be home late. I stepped out of my car, and the exact same scream from the other night happened again. But this time, it was from behind the house, and hearing it for the second time just solidified that it was not an animal. It sounded like a human screaming for their life. It was a sound that instantly terrified you and sent goosebumps all over your body. I instantly ran inside the house and into my mom's room. Neither of my parents had heard the scream, even though it was right outside the house. This was the time that my mother had actually started believing all of the things that had been happening to me. I do believe that these screams were the result of the occurrences that were going on in my room over the last year. It feels good to actually have a place to post these stories. Thank you.
Castle Prendau Normand, a baroque complex that covers 18,300 square feet, located in Valpovo, Croatia. It was built during the first half of the 18th century, according to the wishes of Baron Petar Antun Prendau. It was built on the foundation of the defense tower from the 15th century. The complex contains the defense tower, yard, chapel, courtyard, and the front palace. It was restored in the year 2000, and it is nowadays considered one of the biggest and most important castles in all of Slavonia and all of Croatia. Its glory comes from the legend of the White Maiden. This is a female ghost who has haunted this area since the first half of the 19th century. According to documents from July 1838 in Osiek's Capuchin Monastery yearbook, but also in Franjo Kuhac's notes in magazine Vienets, under the name History of the Valpovo Operation. We begin this story with the lieutenant commander of the Imperial Cavalry Regiment, Kushman, who knew Baron Brandau and who was the Baron's personal guest in the castle after he became ill from the battlefield. Kushman soon enough informs Baron Gustav Brandau that during the night a spirit of a young girl appeared to him, claiming that she had been murdered 100 years ago and that her body was thrown in between the freezer and the city chapel of the castle complex. The White Maiden claimed that she could not rest until all of her mortal remains are recovered and sanctified in the land, blessed by a priest. In return, if Kushman managed to make her final wish come true, she will heal him from his illness and reveal the hiding spot of treasures forgotten. Convinced that the ill man has been hallucinating this white specter, Baron Brandau does not believe his story, but when the Baroness hears this story, she makes her husband investigate the truth behind these informations. In the company of a castle priest, the Baron orders his subjects to start digging in the aforementioned spot. To a great surprise to all, they discover the skeletal remains exactly in the described spot. The whole incident was reported to the bishop Ivan Shitovsky. The bishop allowed the funeral to take place at the Catholic graveyard. A month later, Lieutenant Commander Kushman recovers from his illness and regains perfect health. Yet the promise of the hidden treasures were never revealed. Many people believe that the female apparition had actually been a heroine, a brave young woman who participated in the defense of Valpovo's fort against the Turks. To this day, some people believe that it wasn't her remains that were buried, because some dark nights you can still see a white female silhouette leaning on top of the fortress, while others dismiss this only as a good old ghost story that came to life in a deranged lieutenant's ill head. Some still believe she roams the halls to this day. What do you think?
This past weekend, my soon-to-be wife Alexa and I were settled down for a night of movies, pizza, and cuddling. We live in a residential area right outside of town. Our home is situated across the street from a Presbyterian church with a large cemetery behind it. Most of our neighbors don't own pets, but there's one particular across the street and downwards a bit that owns perhaps the loudest, most annoying dog ever to exist. Quite an annoyance on a night like tonight, but luckily it was quiet for the entire evening. It's around 10:15 p.m. and we are laying down watching a film in our living room when the loudest dog on earth begins to go off. Unfortunately, there's nothing much we can do except maybe confront our neighbor or file a noise complaint, but who wants to be that neighbor that does that? After about 5 minutes, I get off the couch and decide to walk over to our neighbor's home and say something about the dog. As I headed outside and made it to their driveway, unfortunately, I noticed the neighbor wasn't home. Their only car was not there. I decided to walk up and ring the doorbell anyways. After a minute with no one answering, I gave up and headed back towards home. I noticed Alexa had stepped outside and was looking towards the direction of the barking. I told her no one was home and that we should just either ignore it or finally file a complaint. No one should have to deal with a loud dog at night, especially if you're trying to unwind after a long day at work or trying to get some sleep. Alexa and I head back inside for a bit, and finally after 10 minutes, the dog ceases to bark. Alexa and I exhale and laughed a bit before continuing our film. But of course, not long after, the dog starts up again. This time, it sounded vicious. I got up, went outside, and approached our neighbor's fenced-off backyard and saw the dog, who must have heard or saw me coming. It stopped barking, walked up to me, and began to pant in the cute way dogs do. I chuckled and said the dog's name, to which it looked at me and sat down. Such a good animal, even if he's so loud. I then heard something that sounded like someone walking through the leaves, coming from behind me and to the right. I turned around to see someone looking at me from behind a gravestone in the cemetery. The dog must have heard this as well. It sprung up and began to bark in the direction of the gravestone. I looked on as the person continued staring in my direction. As the dog continued to bark, I looked towards my house, where I saw Alexa standing next to her car, looking at me with a confused look on her face. I looked in horror as I saw the person reveal himself from behind the gravestone. His forehead and cheek were stained with red blood dripping down from his chin. In his hand was some sort of dagger. The dog began to go ballistic as the person took a few steps in our direction before stopping. I turned to the dog, then back at my home. Alexa, who was still outside, yelled out to me, asking what was wrong. I told her to call the police. She said, "Why? The dog?" To which I replied, "He's fucking armed." Probably confused, Alexa went inside to grab her phone as I continued to watch the person, who now began to back off, the dog now going berserk. It was going to take a bit of time for the police to reach my home, so I readied myself to go in self-defense mode, as I watched the man finally turn around and walk away towards the back of the cemetery and towards the woods. When the police arrived, the person was long gone, and I was stuck there explaining to a couple of skeptical officers about my encounter. They didn't seem to take me seriously, but investigated the area as I explained to Alexa about the person I saw. When the police left after finding no trace of anyone, Alexa and I didn't feel much better. We locked our doors and windows and decided to call our neighbors to fill them in on everything before heading back to continue our movie night in spectacular fashion with The Exorcist. To start this off, I'm a 19-year-old female, and my friend is 18 and also female. This spring, my friend and I decided to go to the cemetery during the bright day to collect sweets. In our country, there is a custom. After Easter, many people go clean the graves of their deceased relatives, and to honor the memory of them, we put sweets and other products. Other people can come to the cemetery and just pick up what lies on the graves, and thus also honor the memory of these people. That is what me and my friend decided to do. And about a half hour passed without any trouble. All of a sudden we see a quite drunk man, somewhere around his 60s or 70s, which was heading in our direction. He said he couldn't find his bike, and had a bag of candy we assumed he had stolen. Then he for some reason gave us a small bag of sweets, which he collected. We decided to continue the search for sweets and went further into the cemetery. After a while, we noticed the same man was following us at some distance. At first we thought he was just looking for candy too, like us. But after a while, it was noticeable that he was following us. After a while, he caught up to us and decided to start a conversation. First he asked us how old we were. My friend and I look younger than we really are, so we decided to say we were 15 years old for some reason, and he believed us. Then he began to ask us about our personal life, paying extra attention to my friend. Said he wasn't going to rape us, asked my friend if she's ever been with a guy at all. Then he decided to take a more decisive action and try to hug us both at once. We almost ran ahead of him trying to avoid this. Up to that point, my friend was answering very politely, but now she was scared, and I was super annoyed and was talking rudely, which is very unlike me. I said I didn't want him to go with us, but the strange man wouldn't listen. Fortunately, he saw someone that he knew and went with them. My best friend and I decided to run away from him, and we got away. We walked around the cemetery again for a while, constantly looking around, but never saw him again. When I was 12, I lived on the outskirts of town. On the end of my block was a large cemetery. My friends and I always talked about going there late at night, and one night we actually did. We all met up at Jake's house. There was 3 of us: Jake, Josh, and myself. We had our flashlights and one of those old camcorders. It was a quiet night, and we snuck out of the house and walked towards the cemetery. The cemetery was locked but wasn't guarded. There's a part of the gated off area that the ground was a little higher up on, and we were able to climb the fence and get into the graveyard from there. It was approaching 11:30 and was super quiet. We walked around for a while, and it was pretty uneventful, although it was creepy. We were shining our lights on what looked like an expensive gravestone when out of the corner of Jake's eye, he saw something move. Josh thought he saw something too, but I didn't notice anything. We shined the flashlights in the area, but didn't find anything, so we just kept walking. It was getting boring, so we decided to check out one last area before we left. We were looking at a row of what looked like children gravestones when we heard a noise coming from our right. Jake, did you hear that? Yeah. Slowly, let's all shine our flashlights in that direction. On a count of 3. 1, 2. We all turned and shined our flashlights in the direction of the noise. And there was a man, a dirty man, staring back at us. He had an evil look on his face. I couldn't tell if he was homeless or what, but he did not look like a nice person. We just stood there staring at each other for what felt like 5 minutes, but was probably only 30 seconds. We slowly backed up, and that's when it happened. He started screaming on the top of his lungs and running towards us. We all turned around at once and ended up tripping over each other. He was now gaining on us. We got back up and started running, but by this point we were all turned around and in the confusion had no idea where the lower part of the fence was. This caused us to split up, which was scary as shit. It's roughly 20 minutes after we ran from him and split up when I hear Jake scream. It sounded like it was coming from the other end of the cemetery. All of a sudden I see Josh bolting it in that direction with something in his hand, so I follow suit. We run over to the screams, and the man is dragging Jake by the leg, pulling him, as Jake screams on top of his lungs, grabbing at everything. Just when we reached them, Josh swung something and hit the crazy man. I later found out that it was a piece of a tree that broke while Josh was hiding in it. The man fell down, and we bolted all together. At that point, Josh knew where we needed to go, so we followed him and got to the fence and jumped over. We ran back to my house, snuck in the window, and locked it. We don't know what the man wanted, or who he even was, but we're never going by that cemetery ever again, even if we have to take the long way to school.